All right, NHL preview time. And I start all my season previews looking at how the champions from last year built their roster. I think it's good to go back and all right, well, this is the team that got to hoist the shiny thing at the end. So let's see what lessons we can take from this team. And I think there are a couple of interesting ones that we can go with from Florida, back to back, where I'm handwriting notes on this. So let's just going to run through how they got the players and how the Florida Panthers built their championship team. We start with Alexander Barkov, 2013 second overall pick. That was just behind Nathan MacKinnon. I don't think Colorado really kicking themselves for that one, but Florida absolutely gets a good one. Obviously based here in Calgary, this one's going to sting a little bit. Matthew Tkachuk, acquired from the Calgary Flames, along with a fourth round pick for Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, Cole Schwindt, and a lottery-protected 2025 first-round pick. This one was obviously the big swing one. And at the time, there was a lot of, it's the summer of Brad. The Calgary Flames somehow, they lose, Johnny goes to Columbus, Matthew is on his way out, and somehow Brad Treliving got this team to be better. With Jonathan Huberdeau coming in, young defenseman and Mackenzie Weegar, it's Nazem Kadri, and obviously it has not worked. But from a Florida standpoint, Jonathan Huberdeau was the heart and soul of that team. And he was one of the straws that stirred the drink out there. And so to make that move, to go from Jonathan Huberdeau to Matthew Tkachuk, when Huberdeau was such a big part of the fabric of that team, was a really bold move and a really bold decision to make. And in hindsight, obviously it worked. And yeah, toxic. I want to go back and make sure we don't have the, oh my gosh, Matthew Tkachuk was just traded Twitch stream up from before, because holy cow. We were all there. I was there saying look, this team is better. And if nothing else, they are better built now for the postseason. And Matthew Tkachuk has just gone out there for 2 years and absolutely proved me wrong. And that it is kind of reminiscent. I know the camera's not great today, but you can see in the background the Kawhi Leonard picture. It is, it's not a straight line comparison because Tkachuk stayed, but it is very reminiscent of the Raptors trading DeMar DeRozan for Matthew Tkachuk, for Kawhi Leonard, where you have a player who has embraced this franchise that a lot of people have kind of snickered at over the years. And he has been a leader, and he is such a major part of what you are doing with this team. But you also recognize there's a ceiling. And so you can have the guy who everyone likes, or you can get the guy who can go out and win you some championships. And Matthew Tkachuk has got them to within a few wins of a championship one year, and then got them to winning one in the next year. So that would, look, no one is going to argue that the Tkachuk trade didn't work out. I just wanted to explain that all. But yeah, toxic. We were all on that hype train, 100%. Carter Verhaeghe was a free agent acquisition in 2020, in the offseason going into 2020, 2021. Anton Lundell, a first-round pick, 12th overall in 2020. Sam Reinhart, acquired from Buffalo for a 2022 first, which turned into Yuri Kulich? The fact that I don't know tells you that maybe it hasn't hit yet. And Devin Levi, who I do think is going to turn into the goalie of the future for Buffalo, but for Buffalo, but I do think they kind of need that future to be now. Sort of a thing. So there's a bit of frustration with that one. Evan Rodriguez was a free agent signing in the offseason leading into that championship year. And then another one, Flames fans. Sam Bennett comes to Florida from the Calgary Flames, along with a 2022 sixth, which to this point hasn't really turned into a whole lot, I don't believe, for a 2022 second, and Emil Heineman. This is a difficult one, again, from a Flames standpoint to look at, because the Sam Bennett that has showed up for the Florida Panthers did not ever show up for the Calgary Flames. And I don't think that it was the Flames didn't use him in this, the Flames didn't use him in that. Maybe they could have given him more runway in a top six center role, but anytime he got into that, it never worked. I don't think that is one where you can look at it from a Flame standpoint and criticize, oh, well, they didn't blah, 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 because they did everything. They put him with Gaudreau and Monahan. They had him as a top six center. They then, okay, it's not working. Let's build up your confidence, put you on the wing. And the second anything started working, okay, let's move him up the lineup. And it just never worked. He just looked like a bottom six player in Calgary. And I don't know if it was just he needed a change of scenery, if the give a damn meter just ramped up a little bit, or what it was, but something changed when he went from the Flames to the Florida Panthers, and he turned into a player who can help you contribute at a championship level. Now, we always knew the playoff stuff was there, and we've seen that here. That was the intoxicating thing of all of it, is that he would play in the playoffs like an absolute beast. And you can't do that for 82 games. That would be exhausting. But that guy was always there, and you just wished he would drag it out more. And there's still some inconsistencies in Florida, but it is so much better in Florida than in Calgary. But the Flames had exhausted all of their options when it came to that anyway. So I don't think you can really get too worked up about that necessarily. The interesting part about this deal is what the Flames end up doing with it. I know this is technically supposed to be a segment about the Panthers, and I've talked almost as much about the Flames as I have the Panthers, but that'll stop after this one. The two pieces that the Flames get back, they flipped Heineman in the deal for Tyler Toffoli. I don't think he was the key piece of that. No one, I don't think that that trade doesn't happen if Emil Heineman just isn't involved in the trade. But they at least use him to get a piece that contributes to the team, wasn't going to stay, or maybe shouldn't have stayed, and they flip that for Igor Sharangovich. So, it's not a one-to-one, but the Flames do use the piece they got for Sam Bennett to get Sharangovich, who looks like he could be a part of the Flames' future. So they at least turned a bit of a positive out of the negative. They also, that second-round pick that they got in this trade, they didn't end up using that one. This trade, not quite as successful. They flipped that pick to Seattle for Kalle Järnkrok. That one didn't work. That one didn't work as well as the Toffoli trade did. Järnkrok was terrible in the playoffs and then left. Vlad Tarasenko gets acquired from Ottawa for a 2024 fourth-round pick and a 2025 third-round pick. Now, the fourth actually turns into a 26th third because the Florida Panthers won a Stanley Cup. So they haven't technically lost anything from that just yet. Eetu Luostarinen acquired from Carolina with Eric Holla, Chase Prisky, and Lucas Wallmark for Vinny Trocheck. Luostarinen not a crucial part of the championship pedigree of this team, but they at least got a piece back in the Trocheck trade that I thought was just horrendous. And now he's off doing big things with the New York Rangers. So really, I don't know if anyone won that trade. But at least they still have a piece from that contributing here on a championship roster. You have Kyle Okposo acquired from Buffalo for a 2024 seventh-round pick and Kalle Sjölin. The seventh-round pick actually turned into a fifth-round pick because Florida won the Cup, and they used that on Max Curran, center from the Tri-City Americans. I don't think we can really call a winner on that one either way just yet. And Kevin Stenlund, a 2023-2024 free agent. On to the blue line. Gus Forsling. This is insane. A waiver claim from Carolina. I totally forgot about that. I forgot that he was initially a draft pick of the Canucks. They trade him for Clendening, who everyone, I don't know what the draw was with him, but everyone got really excited about that dude. Anyway, not the point. And then he gets flipped again to Carolina, and then they try to pass him through waivers, and the Panthers are just like, thank you. And he turns into one of the best defensemen on a championship-winning team. Brandon Montour, acquired from Buffalo for Steeren Sardarian, who was then traded for a third-round pick. Oh, sorry. They used that pick on this Sardarian fellow who sounds like an extra from Game of Thrones. And I don't believe he has done a whole lot for Buffalo so far. So that kind of feels like a steal in that whole situation. You have Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who is a free agent signing in 23-24, along with Nico Mikkola and Dmitry Kulikov, and you have Aaron Ekblad, a first-round pick in 2014, a first overall pick, in 2014, and Sergei Bobrovsky signed that gigantic contract in 1920. That's an interesting conversation. When I was on Sportsnet 960 out here in Calgary, me and Julian McKenzie talked about this, both on and off air. Because at the time, that contract was gigantic. And then they drafted Spencer Knight, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, this looks like it could be one of the worst contracts in the league. And there are times where he plays like it's one of the worst contracts in the league. But then he has a run in the playoffs like he did, and he is a bad 3-game stretch away from being a unanimous selection for the Conn Smythe Trophy. it's such a weird one. And like he got his name on the Stanley Cup. And he got their names on the Stanley Cup. So there is in no way am I saying that this was a bad contract, but it looked like a really bad contract for a really long time. And now it looks like, oh no, yeah, you're paying a championship goalie, but you should be paying a championship goalie. It's a really weird kind of legacy that Sergei Bobrovsky leaves behind. Like, if you just said to me, hey, is Sergei Bobrovsky a Hall of Famer? I would tell you, absolutely not. But then you look at the resume, it's like, well, he's won 2 Vezinas. Stanley Cup winning goalie. He, I'm not going to say carried that team, but he was the best player on that team for 15 of their 16 wins, I would say. Like he was spectacular. And so it's like, you kind of go through the resume, it's like, fuck, man, he might be. And so what lesson do we take now from Florida? Because I always like to at least take something, like what can we learn on? And again, I'm based here in Calgary. I got the Flames hat. You can't see it because of the bad lighting, but the Blasty is behind me as well. What do we take from this? And I don't want to say, like, don't give up on these players, because we saw it. Like, Sam Bennett had just reached his ceiling and just moved on. But this whole thing that the Flames are doing right now, where they're going out and just like, okay, well, let's see if we can get this underutilized guy here and this underutilized guy here. This is the best case scenario of that. Now, it's a bit of a bigger scale because Florida was trying to win. But I don't know if it is sheer dumb luck or incredible scouting or what it is. I'm sure Florida Panther fans will tell you this is just amazing recognition of talent and understanding what will fit in a Paul Maurice system, and also an amazing job of getting the most out of your talent. I think Florida Panther detractors will tell you, nah, you got a little bit lucky. And it helps to also have Barkov and Ekblad. And that is another big part of it. And I'll get to that in a second, probably. But I think the big thing here, what they were able to do in making moves and going out and picking up some guys who had a pretty good pedigree at one point and had some hype behind them, and now maybe getting them for 15, 20 cents on the dollar and being able to turn them into championship winning players. That is how this roster went from good to great. I think they were able to get, I would say, a pretty significant discount for a Sam Reinhart. Now they're not getting that anymore. But a first-round pick and Devin Levi for Sam Reinhart, who led the world in scoring, and did all of those, like, was just unbelievable for this team all season long. That is a steal. To give up a second and a Heineman for Sam Bennett and what he was able to contribute, an absolute steal. A waiver claim on Gus Forsling, a third-round pick for Brendan Montour. Like, you look at what they were able to do. And again, like a Carter Verhaeghe, just a free agent signing that probably didn't even get mentioned on free agency day. At least it wouldn't have if he wasn't a former Leaf. I think there are a lot of these things where they identified some guys who had some talent and some guys who had some upside from a while ago that maybe had either fallen off a little bit or just weren't maximized in their situation, and they took full advantage of it. And so that is why you see the Flames try to do stuff like they have, and why San Jose goes out and is like, yeah, we'll give up a third-round pick for that guy. Let's see if we can get the last little bit of usage out of a Cody Ceci or something like that. I'm not saying like it's going to hit like this and San Jose is going to be the next Florida, but you do that so maybe you do strike gold with one of these guys, and they do end up being the waiver claim that leads to your championship. But again, it's that championship foundation. And what is it? It is Barkov and it is Ekblad. And it was Huberdeau who then turned into Kachuk. And it's a first overall, or a second overall pick and a first overall pick. Those are the guys that set that foundation. And so that is what San Jose is hoping they get with Celebrini, and Chicago is hoping they are getting with Bedard, and the Flames hope they get soon. They are hoping to get those guys who can build that foundation that you can then expand on with some smart moves like the Florida Panthers made here. So that is the Florida Panthers and how they built their championship team. The NHL season is going to be here very, very soon. There's already some big things happening, obviously, as training camps start to gear up a little bit. And also, I will say, one of the other things that I do is Game Over. We are bringing Game Over Calgary back this year. Go subscribe to the Game Over Calgary YouTube channel right now. But we just made an announcement today as some big things are happening. It is Hyperdrive Hockey with Maxime Van Hoot. That is going to be kind of the flagship show of Game Over. So very excited to get that project up and running. So just watch out for that on Game Over. So that is my official plug for all of that. And that is where a lot of my Calgary video content is going to lie this year on the Game Over Calgary YouTube channel. So today, anyway, back to the preview stuff. Today is what I call my accountability episode, where I go back and look at what happened last year, what some of my picks were going into the season, and maybe some of the stuff we can learn from that. So as you can kind of pick up on the theme from the first couple of days, looking at how the Florida Panthers were built, looking at some of the picks from last year, we're just trying to see what are some lessons we can learn before we go into making some of the predictions going into next year. And so for the NFL one, we just ran through every team's over-under prediction. I'm not going to do that for a couple of reasons. One, that gets into a lot of just listing off numbers. And two, I didn't write them down. And so I don't know where they are. Or I did write them down, I just don't know where I put them. So I know where I put these. So we're going to look at a couple of things. I looked at coaches on the hot seat, overvalued teams, and undervalued teams from last year. And so part one was coaches on the hot seat. I went 2 for 2 on this one. The two were the Canadian teams. I said DJ Smith was on the hot seat, and I said Sheldon Keefe was on the hot seat. I went 3 for 4. I don't know why I put one of these wrong. I also got Don Granato right out in Buffalo. The DJ Smith one, that was a long time coming. And Sheldon Keefe, I think that was a long time coming as well. Don Granato, that one didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Even though I did put him on as a coach on the hot seat for this one, I also did understand, like, Buffalo is still a bit of a building team, but I think there's pressure building out in Buffalo. And that was where we kind of picked it up. It's not necessarily, I think this team is good and I think the coach is bad. With Ottawa, there was a bit of that. I don't think DJ Smith was a very good coach. I think Sheldon Keefe is a fine coach. It's just the pressure was mounting and you needed to make a change. And in Toronto, for financial reasons, they can't change the roster. And in Buffalo, it's just been a long time. And so that is where I think some of that came from. The one that I got wrong was Andre Tourigny out in Arizona. I guess the Coyotes were on the hot seat because they moved out to Utah, but Tourigny moves with them. I don't know if I would put him back on there this year because they're in Utah. I think there's a bit more of a honeymoon period going on there, but they did make some big moves this offseason, and they did make a few moves to try to get this team closer to a playoff spot. And so I think there is going to be a little bit more pressure on him this year. In terms of overvalued teams, I got 1 wrong and 4 right. The one I got wrong was the Boston Bruins at 100.5 points. I thought they were overvalued. I thought last year was going to be the year Bergeron retires, Krejci retires. They don't got shit down the middle, and they're going to fall off. And 3 of those 4 things were true. It was just the falling off part that they didn't do, annoyingly. And they're a team that I have to fight it with this year as well, because I hate the contracts that Lindholm and Zadorov get. But I also can't deny that for this year, those are improvements, and it makes this team better. And so long term, I think they're fucked. But for this year, less fucked. So that's going to be something I have to really combat. But Chicago was way overvalued at 72.5. And this is something I've kind of picked up on. One of my strengths is recognizing bad teams. I haven't been great at recognizing the good ones, but one of the things I have long said on this for the last couple of years, I think there is an overvaluation of bad teams. And we saw, like, Chicago's roster last year was dog shit, aside from Connor Bedard. And if one thing happened to that cat, which it did, then that team goes to hell. And then it happened to Taylor Hall. And so a dog shit roster got dog shittier. And this is something, it happens in over-unders for the NFL. It happens here. It happens in the NBA as well. I don't think these odds makers or the people who place money on them really recognize how actually bad these teams really are and the extent of the suckage that they are going to have. I think there's a lot of hedging going on with some of these. And so I think that's where the value in the market comes, is that they really don't want to put a super low number on some of these teams and get caught being all the way done and having the over hit by February, right? Like it's with the White Sox in baseball, like that under hit by about August. So I do think that there is maybe some value to be had in that. But Chicago at 72.5, Ottawa at 91.5. We were saying that one was gonna go under, and we hit that as well. It was got a little dicey there at the end, but that they did hit the under on that one. Pittsburgh at 96.5. I thought that number was, I think part of it is Pittsburgh's a very public team, given Sidney Crosby being there for 20 years and them being in the limelight for so long. They have kind of turned into a real marquee franchise, and one that I think a lot of people are just going to take the over because that's their team. And also, I do think that there was a lot of best case scenario baked into that. You needed best case scenario from Carlson and Letang and Crosby and any goalie they threw out there and Malkin and the depth pieces, and you just didn't get it last year. And Buffalo was kind of the same thing. There was that thought that there was going to be a bit of progression from this Buffalo team, and that just didn't quite hit. And they're going to be an interesting one to analyze as the year kind of goes on. Undervalued teams, I missed on a couple. The ones that we got wrong, Vegas as the 5th best cup odds. I thought that was really undervaluing Vegas. They struggled in the lead up to the trade deadline. They make a couple of big moves, but they get stuck in a wild card spot, and then they lose to Dallas in the first round. And so I would say that was a no. And then Tampa Bay, I had them at plus 2,000 to win the Stanley Cup. I thought that was undervaluing a veteran team. We will not be in on Tampa Bay this year. I'm going to say that one was wrong. But we got right on going over on Detroit, just barely, but we got the over on the Detroit Red Wings. Over on Winnipeg, and this is one where we took advantage a little bit of some narrative things from last year. 91.5 isn't a bad point total to give a team, but I think a lot of people were out on Winnipeg because of they haven't proven it in the playoffs. It's time to make some changes. And they doubled down on that roster, and people thought, well, this is not the long-term direction. And because of the salary cap and some of these things, we get so focused on the long term that you look at the roster, and it's like, you know what? For this year, it's pretty good. So why are we undervaluing this team? And it's going to be a bit of a battle to do that again this year, because the last time we saw them, they were giving up 100 goals a game against Colorado. It's still a pretty good roster out there in Winnipeg. And the New York Islanders at 91.5. And annoyingly, they went over. I am so over it with the New York Islanders, but they're constantly going better than expectations and getting those points anyway. So that was a team that we got right. So again, what are some of the lessons that we can take from this? I think it is to not overvalue the concerns you have for a team long term. And it is also, they really overvalue some of these bad teams. And I think that's where we can get a little bit of the slightest bit of an edge on the odds makers this year, is that they don't want to go too low on some of these teams where I don't know if too low exists. Who doesn't love a good list? The NHL preview continues as we look at the top 10 players in the NHL this season. These always get good debates going. So if you very aggressively disagree with me in the comment section, by all means, let me have it. But I'm really interested in your guys' thoughts on these. So let's get right into it. Coming in at number 10, it is Artemi Panarin. I think this guy has all the talent in the world. There was a touch of a fall off in the playoffs for the Rangers, and that worries me about putting him here slightly. But you look at what the true marking of like top players is, and one of the things is makes those around you better. Who hasn't gotten better from playing with Artemi Panarin? Mika Zibanejad's career turned around by playing with Panarin, and now Zibanejad is making guys around him better. But you put some of the kids with Panarin, and all of a sudden Lafreniere is taken off. And I'm not saying that's the reason why, but it just anyone who plays with Panarin gets better. He has unbelievable sense of the ice. He has a really good scoring touch as well. The one thing he hasn't done is proven that he can be the best player on a championship team. And I do think that window is kind of closing with the Rangers a little bit, but this is still, I think, legitimately one of the best players in the world. At 9, I have Nikita Kucherov. He still has a bomb of a shot, but I do think that just assuming that he is a similar to a 43-year-old Alex Ovechkin, where all he does is just spam one-timers the whole time, that is incorrect. This is a guy who, again, has a very good playmaking sense, that knows for the net, plays a competitive physical style as well, just does all the things you want your star player to do. And again, you have proof of concept. He's done it in the playoffs a bunch. Tampa Bay is going to be relying on him more this season, if that's possible. With Steven Stamkos gone, yes, they brought in Gensel. As the previews go along, you will come to find that I view that as a not insignificant downgrade. So I think that there's going to be a lot riding on Nikita Kucherov this season, and I think he's going to be able to perform, but he comes in at number 9 on our list. At number 8, it is Sidney Crosby. You still have to put him on this list. And honestly, maybe I have him a little bit too low, based off of how great he was last season. I think you put him on any of the teams represented in the top part of this list, and he would have like 170 billion points. Like he is that good. Has he fallen off a little bit? Maybe a touch, but he is still, again, just everything you want your star player to be in terms of making those around you better. And just, he also has the ability that maybe Panarin lacks a little bit, that Kucherov has certainly shown, but that the other guys on this list definitely have as well, where it is late in the game and it's just like, hey, you know what? I've decided we're not losing today. And Crosby basically did that for 2 months with a really bad Pittsburgh team. So he absolutely deserves to be on this list as a top 10 player in the NHL. At 7, Quinn Hughes. I think he was severely underrated going into last year. Maybe this year he gets a little bit overrated, but I had to put him on this list. When you look at the skating ability that he has, the work in his own end is a work in progress for sure. But they have found a chemistry with him with a couple of guys, and you can see that the comfort that he has. His sense in the offensive zone is so good. His use of his skating ability to create just a little bit of space in offense and then create some better angles to either get a shot away or create opportunities for others, both very strong. And so I do think that Quinn Hughes is someone that deserves to be on this list and provides a real opportunity for the Canucks to be good again this season. At 6, it's Austin Matthews. Again, big body who can skate and put the puck in the net. The playoffs be damned. This is still, I think, one of the best players in the league. His combination of skating, hands, touch around the net, all of those things. Like, he is a big dude who can play like a big dude, but also can play like a teeny little dude, is something that is quite impressive to me. And we can say all we want about the lack of success in Toronto, and holy fuck is it funny, but I do think that Austin Matthews is someone who is still legitimately one of the best players in the world. At 5, Matthew Tkachuk. Sorry, Flames fans, but we have to put Matthew Tkachuk on this list. I don't know how far down we would have to go to put a Calgary Flame on this list, but it is, I would say, significantly further down the 10th. Matthew Tkachuk is just so good, and we finally saw it put together in the playoffs. I know he kind of had a bit of a reputation as being a playoff performer, but if you watched him here in Calgary, he kind of wasn't. Like, he would get, he could be, he absolutely could be, but there would be times where he would kind of get caught up in just like, hey, it's the playoffs, I'm going to get under their skin. And it was his sole purpose in life was to be a fuck. And all he wanted to do was just be an absolute little prick. And it took him out of the play a lot, in some of those series. And I think really hindered Calgary when they needed less of that and a little bit more of like, hey, we don't know what the fuck we're doing. Can you just 2 hands on the wheel and guide us here? Because you have that play style that we need. He has figured that out in Florida. His playmaking ability is excellent. He has some of the best hockey IQ in the league, I think, in terms of how he is able to see the ice and how he is able to kind of manipulate things out there. He has a big body that he can go out into all of the hard areas and help create some opportunities. And then the skill to immediately transition into, I have just bullied the puck away from you, and now we are going to get this. He has creativity on offense, which you love, and he has a really good scoring touch. He checks a lot of the boxes that you would like. And also, like, it was when he was playing with Backlund and Frolik, so, you know, it was what it was, but he can be pretty good on his own end as well. I think waiting until about a few minutes into the why Matthew Tkachuk is the best player in the league to mention his defense, I think is appropriate, but I do think that you can kind of trust him in your own end to a certain degree. At number 4, it's Cale Makar. He's the best defenseman in the National Hockey League. He does everything. I know the default when you see a guy who is out there skating really, really well is to assume that it's Erik Karlsson or one of those guys that, oh yeah, what's he doing in his own end? He is really good in his own end. He and Devon Toews are so clearly the best defensive duo in the National Hockey League, and they, I think, really do give you a sense of calm when they are out there. And like, I will never forget, Colorado was playing Edmonton. I'm pretty sure it was Edmonton. I might be wrong on this one. So maybe I will forget. But there was a play that he had. I am 99% sure it was McDavid who was racing down the ice past him. And he, not that I think he is 100% like the same skater that he and McDavid are. And if they skated for 20 years, neither of them would get ahead of each other in a marathon or anything like that. But when he's busting it, he can get back at there and break that up. And so he has been the real example of the evolution of the defender in the National Hockey League, where it's not just, I'm big Chris Pronger and I got long reach and you can't get past. It's no longer that. And it's no longer, oh, this guy, he's rail thin and he just skates really well, but he has a good shot from the blue line, so we put him as a defenseman. That doesn't work. He has evolved this position to the point where you can use this skating now as a defensive weapon, as both a transition defense thing to limit opportunities, but also in your own end, that just short burst speed that you can have to break things up. It's really, really good. And I don't know if this was a thing before. I've only been in this world for a couple of years now, but since my full-time exit from Sportsnet 960, I have been lucky enough to do play-by-play for a number of different Junior is saying a bit too. Oh, I've done a bunch of junior hockey too, but a bunch of minor hockey tournaments and varying skill sets, obviously. But the one thing I've really noticed is a lot of teams now put their best skater as a defenseman. And I don't know if that was something that was happening before or what it was, but I do think that the fact that it's happening so much is a testament to what Cale Makar is doing, which doesn't necessarily mean he is, that doesn't just put you on this list, but it just shows the impact that he has had. At 3, it's Nathan MacKinnon, does everything you would want. He sees the ice so well, is the probably second best skater in the league. Goal scoring, yes. Playmaking ability, yes. Leadership, yes. All of those things. I feel bad. Like I feel like I have to justify the guys further down the list. And so when you get to the top 3, it's like, yeah, you know. And it feels like I don't talk up these guys enough. Like, this is one of the best players I've ever seen in my life. I say that understanding that my life is now coming up on 35 years. So it's been watching this thing for a while now. And he's legitimately one of the best players I've ever seen. He's my favorite player to watch. The shot is amazing. The speed is electric. It is what he does with that speed and how he is able to take over games. Very few have been able to do. And so I think you have to give him major props for that. At 2, Leon Draisaitl, big body. This playoff, he didn't really do it all that much because he was, I think, very obviously banged up. But he has shown in the past that he can be playoff performer. And again, does everything you would want. Playmaking, scoring, skating, all of those things. He does that so incredibly well. He raises up players on his line and makes them all better. And I think something that is very interesting about him, he is very good at also being Robin on a line, right? Like he's a very good Batman. And based on how this list is, as the number 2 player in the world, and I think we all kind of know who number 1 is, if he's on any other team in the league, he's the best player on that team. And so, like, there aren't many cases where he is going to be Robin. He is a very, 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 very good Batman. But during the playoffs, when I think it was clear that he was banged up, and they would put him on the line with Connor McDavid, all of a sudden, he knows how to fit into that role. It's not just like, oh, there's only one puck. How are they going to figure it out? It's like, okay, no. That's that guy. So I feel like I need to now shift into this role. And he played the complementary role perfectly. I don't think there's any role he can't play on the ice. I love the talent. And at one, it's Connor McDavid. I think like that playoff run is one of the great playoff runs we will ever see in our lives. It is incredible what he was able to do. And I am not saying he is the best player ever, because I do think resume has to count in that conversation. But similar to Patrick Mahomes right now in the NFL, this is the best player, the most talented player I have ever seen. And that, I know who that includes. But when you look at the speed that he is able to do things and the precision, the hand, like just everything is perfect about his game at a speed that no one's been able to play at before. It is remarkable what he is able to do. So will he have a career the same as a Wayne Gretzky? I think very clearly not. He's almost basically run out of time too already, which is more a testament to Gretzky than a knock on McDavid, but definitely a knock on the Oilers. But in terms of just pure on the ice talent, I have a hard time believing anyone's better ever than Connor McDavid. So that is my top 10 list of best players in the NHL. The 2024-2025 NHL season preview continues here on Couch Potato Diary. As we look ahead to this season, we've been doing a little bit of like, okay, what did we learn last year? But now we start to progress into the, okay, these teams are really good portion of the conversation. And so today, looking at the most talented teams in the league, maybe not necessarily like the most cohesive or built the best to win or anything like that. It is just when we stack them all up, who's got the most talent? And so I will say, for a little bit now, I have had the Toronto Maple Leafs on this list. And for the first time in a while, I don't. I just feel like this is a team that obviously their high end talent is very good, right? Marner, Nylander, Matthews, fantastic. I do consider Tavares someone as potentially taking a step back. I look at some of their depth issues, and I can't put this team there anymore. And I know this is supposed to be a list that isn't about like, oh, well, can they do it in the playoffs or whatever, and it's just supposed to be about talent. But I also think that we have a lot of teams that have built up their talent over the last little while, and so Toronto just having like a very top-heavy roster isn't enough anymore. So, coming in at number 5, it's the New York Rangers. They get on this list mainly because of the progression of Lafreniere. And if he can take or kind of stay at that level, and Kakko can take a bit of a step here, then all of a sudden you got something. You have one of the best goalies in the league, you have one of the best defensemen in the league, and you have one of the best players in the league. Pretty good. And to go along with those guys, there's Zibanejad, Kreider, like I said, Lafreniere, Trocheck on this team as well. And I think Schneider has a chance to take a jump forward for the Rangers this year, that there is just so much high-level talent on this team. And then I think they've built the depth out with some exciting young pieces as well. Really, really well. So the Rangers come in at number 5 for me. At 4, it's the Colorado Avalanche. Best defensive pair in the league in Makar and Taves. You have McKinnon, who is still a top 3 player in this league. You have Rantanen, who is probably like a top 15 or 20 player in the league. And you have the championship pedigree of a lot of pieces that they have been able to build around. Yes, they do seem a little bit more top heavy, and we just kind of flogged the Leafs for being that. But you have a core that has proven it, and you have a defensive group that can be one of the better in the league. And so I can't not have Colorado on this list. At 3, it's Vegas. They've lost a bit, right? This has not been a good offseason for the Vegas Golden Knights. With Chandler Stevenson going, Jonathan Marchessault going. Those are heart and soul types of players that have left. What you have left is Aiden Hill, who I think is pretty good. You still have a blue line that's absurd with Pietrangelo, Hannafin, and Shea Theodore. That 1-2-3 is stupid. Shea Theodore would be a number 1 on a lot of teams, and at least a number 2 on most. And the fact that he's a 3 behind Pietrangelo and Hannafin is just nuts. And then you have McNabb after that. And then up front, again, they've lost a bit of depth. There is no questioning that. But you still have Eichel, Stone. You have Hurdle now. You have just so much high-level offense. The depth, just as an organization, they've had trouble building it out because they trade all their draft picks away, and they're still kind of new, so that they haven't been able to really progress into that depth area just yet. But I do think they have a few pieces that could kind of contribute. But when you look at the high-level talent on this team, and goddamn, is it there, man? So the Vegas still makes this list at number 3. At 2, it's the Edmonton Oilers. Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl were 1 and 2 on my best players in the NHL list. And so, yes, again, got on Toronto for being top heavy, but when you have 1 and 2, you deal with it. Bouchard took a big step. Ekholm has been a steadying presence on that blue line. Darnell Nurse, I think, had a rough playoff, but is still one of a very good defender, I will say. And then up front, obviously, we know who they have. But also, you have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who is a year removed from a gigantic season. Zach Hyman, who scores 1 billion goals. You have added Arvidsson, who I think will add a little bit of that sandpaper that teams like. You have Skinner, who can help out with some scoring depth stuff. Like, it is a very, very talented team. And so they get to number 2. But in a number 1, they are the Stanley Cup champions, the Florida Panthers. When you look at a team that has Barkov and Matthew Tkachuk, the goaltending situation with Bobrovsky and eventually Spencer Knight, and then on the blue line, Forsling and Ekblad, who were amazing in the playoffs last year. Yes, they do lose Montour, but still, when you look at this roster top to bottom, this is a very, very good hockey team and a very talented hockey team. And that is why they are number 1 on my list for the most talented teams in the NHL going into this season. Doesn't mean they'll win the cup, although they did last year, but they are the number 1 most talented team on my list this year. All right, the NHL season is rapidly approaching. The prospects are off at various different development tournaments and whatnot starting this weekend. So we'll be getting into some of that, which I guess makes this topic of note, I suppose. Today, looking at who could potentially break out in the NHL this season. And some of these, I might be stretching breakout a little bit, I'll be honest. But I still, guys who I think can kind of level up going into this season. So first, a couple honorable mentions. Marco Rossi from the Minnesota Wild and Braden Schneider for the New York Rangers. Both of them, I feel like, have another level that they can get to. Maybe more Schneider than Rossi, but both of them I still think will take a bit of a step up this year. They just didn't quite make the list. Now, the first one is definitely cheating. But I do think he's going to break out in a big-time way, and that one is Connor Bedard. I think we just got a glimpse of what he can do with the Chicago Blackhawks a season ago, and I think that this is a really exciting player that everyone was kind of right on, and you can see that he is going to be something special, and I think we start to really get a grasp of that specialness coming up this season. Coming in at number 4, again, has kind of broken out already, but I think there is absolutely another level to the breakout that is coming, and that is Cole Caulfield. I think this is going to be a big year for the Montreal Canadiens, and I think that he is a player that has an opportunity here to really shine, given the bringing in Laine, another year of development, another year of staying healthy, and just what I believe to be a better hockey team as all these guys continue to develop is going to give him more opportunities. And so, yeah, he's already scored 28 goals. So maybe this, he doesn't necessarily fit this list, but I think that there is a second kind of act to the breakout that is coming for him. At 3, it's Dylan Holloway, finally with an opportunity, we would assume, with the St. Louis Blues. And yes, he is going to a team that isn't quite as good as the one that he was just on, that came within a game of winning the Stanley Cup. But Dylan Holloway is still a very, very good hockey player, and I think he has a real opportunity in what I would presume to be a bigger role, I think he has an opportunity to really shine and really show what he is capable of doing. I have always been a fan of the player, and I think that we're going to really see a big Dylan Holloway breakout in the upcoming season. At 2, I have Uri Slafkovsky. He has signed a contract as if he has broken out, but statistically, he hasn't really done that yet. I think this is the year he puts it all together. He was starting to put it together in the back part of last year. I think now he kind of understands the NHL game. I think he has a better grasp on everything, and I believe that we are going to see clearly the best version of Uri Slafkovsky this year. I think he's going to have an unbelievable year. And at number 1, it is Mason McTavish. I kind of thought he had already broken out. The stats don't really match what I think he can do and the level that I think he can get to. Again, I think he's going to be on a good Anaheim Ducks team. Good might be a bit of a stretch. An improved Anaheim Ducks team, that's better. And I think he is going to be someone who can really grow into another role with this club. So I think that this is a player in Mason McTavish that has a real opportunity here to break out. And I think, honestly, Anaheim kind of needs it. There's a lot of pressure on this team this year. And so I think that if they're going to finally start to progress a little bit, I think Mason McTavish is going to be a guy who can help them out with that. NHL preview time. As the season gets closer and closer, we had rookie Young Star Classic tournament thingies happening all weekend, still happening out in Penticton with the Calgary Flames and all the other teams that are participating in that event. And so you go from that to training camp, and we go from training camp to preseason games, and we get excited about preseason games for about an hour, and then they're preseason games, and we don't care. And then we want to get the regular season going, and then we finally do. And so what I'm saying is the season's going to be here before we know it. And so today we are looking at the overvalued players and teams for the NHL. I'm realizing now I didn't copy over the players part into my notes, but we'll work with that. So we'll start with the teams, shall we? This is one, I know I was on Sportsnet 960 earlier this morning. I hyped it up as these are the overrated teams in the NHL. This first one I don't think is overrated. I'm basing overvalued off of points projections, and so I am sorry for my local audience here. It's the Calgary Flames. I don't think anyone's overrating them. I think the only people who are overrating them are the fine folks out in Las Vegas, Nevada, and the odds makers. The Flames' point total for over-under betting this year is 80.5. The Flames last year finished with 81 points. And that is a season where you got at least part or all of the season with Lindholm, Hanifin, Tanev, Shillington, Markstrom, Zadorov, Mangiapane. All of whom not there. All of whom have been replaced by Anthony Mantha and Jake Bean. And so, yes, I do think that there is reason for optimism in Calgary, but not for results this year. I was flabbergasted to see the Flames at 80.5. I think that this is going to be a year of growth. I think it's going to be a year of development, but I also think it's going to be a year of maybe a little bit of bad hockey, especially on that blue line. I have great concerns about what this team is going to look like defensively this year. And when you have a basically rookie goalie behind a defense that has like 2 legitimate NHL defensemen on it, I don't know how this team gets above 500 this season. So again, I think we are going to come out of this season feeling positively about the Calgary Flames, but it's not going to be because they had a 500 season. I think that's... I was stunned by that. And so I know my audience tends to be a little bit more Calgary Flames leaning. And so if y'all in the chat want to let me know what I'm missing, that this team could get to a 500 record, I don't see it at all. Coming in at number 2, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Their total is at 90.5. They were at 88 points last year. Does anyone think the Penguins improved this offseason? I don't. I think that they have done actually a very bad job of building up around Sidney Crosby again. And you got one of the best Sidney Crosby seasons you could possibly expect last year. And still 88 points. And it's another year of wear on Carlson, on Letang, on Malkin, on all these guys. The goaltending issue, I don't think has been figured out. This is not a talented hockey team. And I think a lot of teams in the East got better. And I feel like a lot of teams in the East have passed by the Pittsburgh Penguins. And so I really do think that this is a year where the Penguins fall off. And I get part of the reason why they are at 90.5 is they are a what you would call a public team, but still, this is insane. So I think they are one of the, and honestly, like I put Calgary up there first because they were the first odds that I came to, honestly. I think Pittsburgh is probably the most overrated team in the NHL going into this season. And I don't know if it's that close. Up next, it is the Tampa Bay Lightning. They replaced Stamkos with Gensel, and I don't think people realize how much of a step back that is. It does seem to make, and look, long term, maybe it does make sense. But one of the things we talked about in the accountability episode is we need to not overvalue what we think of some decisions long term and apply those to the short term. And the main lesson of that was the Lindholm and Zadorov contracts, where I think that they are just absolute disasters long term for Boston. But that's going to make them better this year. On the other side, long term, getting a substantially younger Jake Gensel into the lineup instead of Steven Stamkos. Long term, makes sense. Short term, I think it's a step back. Stamkos scored 40 goals. I think it's 2 of the last 3 seasons, and 41 goals last year. Gensel didn't come close to that. I think Gensel is fine, but I don't think Gensel is a takeover games in the way that Steven Stamkos was. I think Gensel is maybe a bit more of a complementary piece than than people assume that he is. And no, like, I don't think Stamkos is going out there 1-on-5 and creating his goals. I think he got a lot of help from guys who are going to help Gensel out. And so I think Gensel probably has a good year, but I think that this is a step back for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And again, they have not looked threatening in a couple of years. And I think that it is going to be another season like that. So for them to get to 98.5, this could be a 95-point team and we still win this. So yeah, under 98.5 on Tampa Bay. I think that is way overvalued. Up next is Washington at 89.5. I just don't think they're that good. I think that so much of their focus is going to be on just spam feeding OV one-timers. I think they got a boost from trading some veteran players and some youth into the lineup last year. But I do think that they are going to take a step back. I think the league isn't going to be surprised by them. Maybe Liljegren is just the guy between the pipes and off Washington goes. But I don't look at this roster as a good one. I think the Mangiapane trade is not going to help them as much as they think. I think having Pierre-Luc Dubois there, we haven't seen that he helps a ton. I think that is kind of a net negative. And so I worry about Washington. I don't think they're going to be that good. And the last one is San Jose. 64.5 is tough to call a team overrated on. That's a 17-point bump from last year. And they do. They were historically bad last year. And they have better players this year with Celebrini and Toffoli and who was it? Was it Barclay Goodrow that they claimed off waivers? They have added some good players to this team, for sure. But not a 17-point improvement, I don't think. I think that this is going to be kind of similar to the Bears in the NFL, where they may not have, like, they will feel better than a 65-point team, but they won't literally be a 65-point team. Deeds in the chat. How dare you, PK? Dubas is well known for building around his star players. Okay, can't keep a straight face. No, you're right. I gave Dubas so many benefits of the doubt, right? Yeah, with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I wanted to believe that accumulating that amount of talent would lead to success. And it very obviously hasn't. And so he has learned exactly nothing from that. The depth on this team is not built up well. He has not done anything to help supplement things around Sidney Crosby. This is a poorly constructed roster. And you could give Dubas a pass in year one because it was year one, and he's just trying to figure everything out. He goes out and acquires Erik Karlsson for no good goddamn reason. But now it's your fault. And now you need to fix it. And he hasn't fixed it at all. Okay, so now, just quickly, overvalued players. This isn't going to be a big fantasy hockey podcast this year. It's just, that one is not in the wheelhouse. So if I can get some guests sometimes to help with that, then yes. But in terms of my quick analysis on these things, fantasy football is going to be a bigger part of this show for sure. But just quickly, overvalued players in the NHL this year in fantasy. Evander Kane comes in at 5, ahead of Blake Coleman, Scheifele, Patrick Kane, and Clayton Keller. I'm basing these off of NHL.com fantasy ratings, and we all know how good NHL.com is at making lists, so maybe I shouldn't be. But I think Evander Kane is just showing more and more that he's falling off. And I get, like, in fantasy hockey, you get things for hits and stuff like that, but you kind of got to catch guys to hit them, and I don't think he's going to be able to do that a whole lot this year. So I do not have faith that Evander Kane is going to be able to put up a whole lot for Edmonton this season. And so him ahead of guys like Blake Coleman, who I think will have a bigger part of the Calgary offense this year and still does like the hits and all of those things that can help, is insanity to me. Number 4 and 3 are kind of together. It's Georgiev and Stuart Skinner at 51 and 52. But like Georgiev is just kind of meh. And so to have him in the 50s, I feel like at that point, you may as well just try to like stream goalies or something, because that feels like a waste of a pick to me. And Stuart Skinner, like, yes, he has an amazing bounce back in the playoffs and rides that wave to within one game of the Stanley Cup championship. He was pulled in the playoffs and also was horrendous at times in the regular season. And so to just assume that he is going to have this bounce back and be everything that you want him to be, I don't see that. So I think those guys in the 50s are quite insane. At 2, it's John Tavares, 62nd overall. Again, ranked ahead of Stützle, Zibanejad, and Tage Thompson. And Tavares, I don't think, is really going to be a guy who fills up other parts of the stat sheet. I think he is very obviously slowing down. I think there is a lot of concern about what's happening with this team in terms of some of the other star players. He loses the captaincy. And so I think to have him over a Tage Thompson, who puts up mega points, and Zibanejad and Stützle, I don't see it. And then at number 1, it is Jake Gensel, 31st overall in fantasy. Again, I think he's going to a good situation, so that helps. But I think part of it is I just don't think he is as good as everyone else around the league thinks he is. I don't see it in the ways that other people do with him. And so that is why I'm just out on Jake Gensel and on Tampa Bay this season. It's getting closer, isn't it? We got, like I said yesterday, we got the Young Stars Classics happening in their various forms across North America. Training camp discussions are happening. It's all very exciting. And so the previews continue today, looking at some teams that maybe aren't being taken seriously enough across the National Hockey League. Let's start with the undervalued teams. No particular order to this, but at number 1, it's Carolina. I did not expect Carolina to be on this list. Quite frankly, I thought they would be on the other one. But they finished with 108 points last year, I think. They might have had more than that, actually. But they finished well north of 100 anyway. And their point total from Vegas is 100.5. The East has gotten a little bit better. I do think, like, there are a lot of teams on the come up in the East right now. And Carolina did lose quite a bit of talent. They kind of recovered okay. Right? Like, they pick up Walker. They make a couple other additions. I don't think this team lost as much as we thought they did. And so I do think that there is a little bit of sticker shock in seeing, oh my God, those guys left? Okay, well, that's a problem. And I think there's a little bit of fatigue with people based on a lack of playoff success for this team. But I still think that makes this a value at 100 points. And so I think Carolina probably gets it. I still think this is one of the best teams in the league. I worry about the goaltending. And so to make a long-term investment on a Carolina is a bit of a scare. But I have faith that they're and I also think they have the best coach in the league. At 2, it's Dallas. They lose Pavelski, but it's another year of development for the kids. It's another year of development with Jake Ottinger. They did have a lot go right last year. And I guess like the counterpoint to it's another year of development for the kids, it's another year on the tires for Ben and Sagan and those gigantic contracts that they have. They do lose Tanev, which was a really, really smart move, picking him up last year. He's on his way now to Toronto, but I still think this is a really good hockey team that has a ton of offensive firepower. They have, I think, one of the best defensemen and one of the more underrated players in the league in Miro Heiskanen on their blue line. I still think this is one of the most talented teams in the NHL. And again, 103.5 points is a lot. They're going to have another very good year, but that is a step back from where they were a season ago, and I think they can improve upon things out in Dallas. At 3, and honestly, this one, if we were ranking them in terms of who I thought was the most undervalued, it might be this team. It's Montreal at 76.5. I think they're just quite a bit better. That they go out, they acquire Patrick Laine. And I understand there are some concerns about Laine, and he hasn't been Patrick Laine in capital letters in a real long time. But if I'm right about Montreal getting breakout performances from Slavkovsky and Caulfield, Nick Suzuki is going to be solid. Gallagher's going to be him for as long as he is healthy. I don't think that you're going to have, like, I think Doc is going to be able to step up as well. I don't think Laine is going to be called upon to do as much for this team offensively. Well, I guess that's the only way he's going to be called. No one's asking him to do a whole lot defensively. But I do think that he's not going to be going to have to go out there and carry a lot of the load for this group offensively. I think he is going to be a very well paid, but I think best case scenario for Montreal is he is kind of a complimentary type of a guy and a bit more of a finisher while you have some of the young kids kind of flying around. But I have great faith that you have some pretty good development in some of these kids and they take a step forward. I think that there are going to be some steps taken on this blue line this year. You do have some concerns about what's happening in goal. I think they do kind of have to figure out what they have in a couple of these guys. And also, there have been some things tactically with Marty St. Louis while this team has been building up that make me concerned about really buying into Montreal this year. All that is fine when you're doing the rebuilding thing, but now when you're trying to take that step out of the rebuild category and into the competing for a playoff spot category, that is when you kind of need those coaching decisions to be ironed out a little bit. And so Marty St. Louis, I think, has to have his best season as a coach, and a lot of guys need to have their best year, but I think that this is a team that can finish over 500, and so I like taking them as an undervalued team at 76.5. Seattle is next at 87.5. And what is one of the lessons that we learned from the accountability episode that we did? The worry about the long-term contracts can absolutely be a long-term worry. But for one season, that kind of goes out the window. Do not overvalue your concern about the value of a contract when you are looking at that player for a year. And so, yes, signing Stevenson and Montour to those contracts, specifically Stevenson, signing those guys to those contracts feels rather inhibitive long term. That being said, also makes this a better hockey team this year. Stevenson, I think, is the exact type of a player that this group kind of needed, and they still have a very good blue line, I think, and adding Montour to that really does help. There's going to need to be a little bit more scoring on this team, but I think Beniers taking a step forward and maybe getting a little bit more out of a Shane Wright. I think that there's potential for this Seattle team to be a playoff team this year. And at number 5, it's Winnipeg. The last impression we got wasn't good, but this is still, I think, a good roster. Connor Hellebuck is still one of the best goalies in the world. Defensively, Morrissey, one of the best defensemen in the world. You still have Scheifele. You still have Connor. You still have, for now, Ehlers. You still have a lot of offensive talent. I think they have some very good depth when they made that trade with the LA Kings for PLD in being able to get guys like Iafallo, to add to guys like Nemesnikov and Lowry and Appleton and all of that. I think this is a very well-built team that is going to give other teams some problems once again in the Central Division. And so 95.5 points, love it. I will take that. I do feel a little bit worried that a few of my undervalued teams, actually all of my undervalued teams, with the exception of one, still have pretty high point totals. So that could come back to bite me a little bit. But overall, those are the teams that I think are wildly underrated or undervalued going into this year. In terms of players, again, going off the NHL.com fantasy rankings, just quickly, at 5, it's Steven Stamkos, 53rd overall. He had 40 goals in 2 of the last 3 years. To get a 40-goal guy in, what would that be, like 4th, 5th round, seems kind of awesome. And so I think there is, I think, a real undervaluing of Steven Stamkos going on right now. We talked about it yesterday in people overvaluing the Tampa Bay Lightning. Going from Stamkos to Gensel is a step down. And for Stamkos, yes, going from having Kucherov and Point around to Marchessault is a bit of a step down. That being said, Stamkos is still good. People, I think, are treating him like he's this old vet who's just going in to just be the leadership hire for the Nashville Predators. That is not the case. This is a guy who can fill up stat sheets. And so I think he's being undervalued right now. His teammate, Gus Nyquist, comes in at 4 at 126th overall. 23 goals last year with Forsberg. And A, Philip Forsberg is an amazing distributor of the puck. B, I think now, with Stamkos, with Marchessault as a second line, and then whoever you want to put with them, that is going to get a little bit more of the attention that Forsberg and Nyquist got last year. And so you're probably going to get the top defensive matchups on those guys. And so there is one in the column for Stamkos, but also I do think that it's not going to be the sole defensive focus, because that was it last year for Nashville. It was Forsberg, it was Nyquist, and that was it offensively, and then whatever you're getting from the blue line. But now, with a bit more of a rounded out lineup, you can't just focus on one team this year, and so I think Nyquist might be able to benefit from that. Also, Nyquist is 100% on my I can't quit you guys. I will always be a Gus Nyquist fan. At 3, it's Mika Zibanejad, 65th overall. Point totals the last 3 years, 72, 91, 81. He fills up a stat sheet. This is still a very good New York Rangers team, and so I think people are kind of overlooking him a little bit. At 2, Adrian Kempe, 44th overall. 28 goals last year, ended up a stretch of back-to-back 35-goal seasons. Also, I know fantasy isn't just goals and assists. He had 75 penalty minutes last year for an LA Kings team that likes to kind of go crash, bang, boom, and so he can do that as well. And so I think there's a little bit of value with him at 44th overall. And coming in at number 1, it's Connor Bedard, 50th overall. We saw last year with limited teammates and in a bit of a limited sample size that he is the truth. And yes, he's probably not getting 100 penalty minutes for you this year, blah, 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 blah. But I think this is going to be a gigantic step forward for him. I think he has better line mates than he had last season, and I think that is going to rocket him into some gigantic numbers this year for the Chicago Blackhawks. So those are my undervalued players in the NHL this year. The NHL season is fast approaching, and with it comes a lot of pressure for a lot of players and coaches. Today, we are looking at the players and coaches on the hot seat. Who needs to have a good year this year in the NHL? Let's start with the coaches. Coming in at number 5, it's Rod Brind'Amour. I think Brind'Amour is the best coach in the NHL. I think it's absurd to suggest that he would be on the hot seat. But there was enough fire around his contract situation last year and enough debate around it that I just feel like he needs to have a good year. Also, I will say, again, while I think he is one of the best coaches in the league, if not the best coach in the league, at some point this team has to win. At some point, even with the talent that they lost, and we talked about them in the undervalued teams yesterday, with the talent they lost, they have been a very good hockey team for a really long time. And they've added big names like Burns. They've made big deadline acquisitions like Gensel. And they still have not been able to get over the hump and get into the Stanley Cup final. At some point, there's going to be pressure to do that. Fairly or unfairly, I think there's going to be that pressure. At 4, John Tortorella with the Philadelphia Flyers. I think that he did a great job in dragging a good season out of this team last year. I do have some concerns about the growth of this team going forward. Also, he tends to wear out his welcome a little bit. And him on a bad team tends to not go super well. And so I just worry about how this team is going to do and how he is going to react to that. So he is at 4. At 3, Andre Tourigny for Utah. I had him on the list last year with Arizona. I think you can kind of explain away a lot of what happened in Arizona this last year. It was a very, very tumultuous season, shall we say, where midway through the year, all your players are trying to figure out, like, hey, where are we going to live next year? And that became a bit of a talking point and became a bit of a distraction. Now they're in Utah, and we have seen teams do quite well early on in their new spots. Vegas, Seattle. Seattle might be a bit of it. I guess Vegas is the exception. But we have seen that there is some pressure to try to grow this. And Utah has come out and made some big moves, acquiring Sergachev, which I forgot to mention in my overvalued thing with Tampa Bay. I think that the move from McDonough to Sergachev is actually bigger than people are realizing. But I think that there's going to be pressure on Utah to make a move here this year. And out in Detroit is Derek Lalonde. He is number 2 on my list. Detroit has made a couple of big moves in the last couple of years by going out and acquiring DeBrincat and making some very good draft picks to try to push. And each year it gets close, and they got very close to the playoffs last year. They just didn't get there. If this is another year where it's close, but they just didn't get there, I think Derek Lalonde is packing his bags and getting out of there. And at number 1, it's the Pittsburgh Penguins. Some of the pressure is off with Sidney Crosby signing an extension, but I don't think it's a very good roster. I do think that it is a team that probably needs some change, and I do think that it is a roster that, given some of the cap whatevers, is going to be difficult to change. And so, what change can you make? The coach. So I do wonder if Mike Sullivan needs a very good year for the Pittsburgh Penguins to kind of keep his job out there this year. Now, let's get to players on the hot seat. At number 5, it is Nikolai Ehlers. There's a lot of talk about him getting moved by the Winnipeg Jets anyway. He has long been a guy who it has kind of felt like a ton of talent. Either coaches don't trust him or it just hasn't clicked or whatever it is. But I do think there's a very good hockey player there. At some point it has to just work though, right? And at some point the lack of opportunities you're getting is kind of on you to a certain degree, I will say. And again, it's been a long enough period of time where I think you say that. I do think that he kind of needs a good year here, or there's a lot of pressure on him here, or he might be going elsewhere if Winnipeg wants to go in a different direction. At 4, it's Thomas Chabot. I think there's a ton of talent in this kid, and I think the world of him as a hockey player. But it has been a rough couple of seasons. Now it's been a rough couple of seasons in Ottawa, but it's been a rough couple of seasons for him. And there was a lot of talk, and most of it from the fan base, of trying to get this guy out of town. And like, oh, well, maybe in a Noah Hannafin trade, would you guys take Chabot back instead? That is the part where, and a lot of Flames fans are like, we're good. That is the part that should concern, I think, with him, is that your fan base has soured and other fan bases don't want him. Again, I think he's really good, but I think he needs to prove it this year. Again, with a lot of pressure on Ottawa to try to make their way back into the playoffs. They move on from Chychrun. They didn't get a whole lot back for him. There's going to be pressure on Chabot to help get Ottawa across that finish line. At 4, it's at 3, it is Trevor Zegras. Anaheim feels like they're ready to take a step. And while their young players have progressed, Zegras has kind of just stayed the same. And there have been injury issues and there's been all of this. But it does feel like if Anaheim wants to make a big roster-altering move, he would be the very easy one to do that on. Me personally, I think he's wildly overrated. I think he can do some flashy shit, but I think as a actual producer and a make players around you better, I don't think he's all that great. And so I think if you can get for Anaheim, maybe a bit more for him reputationally than you are actually getting for him as a hockey player, that can be a really big adjustment and a really big upgrade for your team. And so I think if Anaheim isn't taking that step that they want, he's going to be the one who's on the way out. At 2, Freddie Anderson. We talked about the pressure that's on in Carolina. I do think Freddie Anderson had a couple very good games in the playoffs, but I do think that Freddie Anderson let in some absolutely boneheaded goals that cost the Carolina Hurricanes in the postseason, and it really set them back. And they have, again, even though they lost a bit this year, they still have such a talented roster. But he has to be a guy who can go out and steal some games, and has to be at least a guy who's not going to lose them some games. And he was a guy who lost them games last year. He needs to not be that this year. And number 1, it's been the talk of the offseason. It's Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner was on the trade block. It felt like it's just kind of perpetually on the trade block. Given the contract, given the lack of success that the Toronto Maple Leafs have had, he and the contract status of everyone else, he is now feeling like the one who could finally, of that core 4, face some kind of repercussions for this team's lack of success. I don't think it's a secret they tried to move him during this offseason and just couldn't. And so if he wants to stay a Toronto Maple Leaf, and honestly, I wonder what that contract looks like after this season anyway. He will probably get paid. I'm not saying he's going to get 4 by 5 or anything like that, but I do think there's a lot of pressure on this kid this year to set himself up for the future and to show one last time that maybe this thing can work out in Toronto. All right, it is another edition of our NHL preview as we get ready for the start of the NHL season. And look, every team comes in saying they are the one that, like, this is our year. It's Stanley Cup or bust. Here we go. We got this. This is our year. We know only a few mean that, though, right? We have an understanding, like, they're talking in Calgary about, yeah, I think we can surprise some people. Will you? We'll see. But there are some teams who that's legitimate. It is Stanley Cup or bust. And there are even more teams who have a lot of pressure on them coming into this season. And so today, going to be looking at the teams that need the Stanley Cup the most. Which teams need to win this year? Obviously, I feel like a lot of teams, want to win and all of those things. But who needs this one the most? I have a poll up right now, so you guys can get that voting going and all of those things. But let's get into it now. Honorable mention to the Carolina Hurricanes. This is a team that I feel like they have underperformed in the postseason the last couple of years. I do only have them as an honorable mention simply because they are a team that lost quite a few pieces in this offseason. And so I think the pressure to do well, even though I put their coach on the hot seat on the last preview episode that we did on Wednesday, I do think that this is a team that probably has a little bit of wiggle room. So, coming in at number 5, the team that needs it the most this year in the NHL, it's the Boston Bruins. The Bruins are a team that long, proud history, all of those things. But it's been a minute since they were a Stanley Cup contender in, the late rounds of the Stanley Cup playoffs and things like that. They have gone out and made some big acquisitions that people in Calgary are going to be very familiar with, right? When you bring in Nikita Zadorov and you bring in a Elias Lindholm, you are not doing that just so the long-term stability of this organization. You are wanting to win now because those contracts, just I hate to tell you, those contracts aren't going to look awesome in the next couple of years. And so when you have the Boston Bruins, who haven't been out of the second round since they lost to the St. Louis Blues back in 2019, I think there's some pressure on here. And I think that this is a team that is going to try to come out and really make a statement. Again, I think it gets ugly. We're also in the latter stages of Brad Marchand and in the latter stages of, not latter stages, I guess. I was going to say of Pastrnak. I don't think that's accurate, actually. But Marchand, he is on the back part of his career, still playing very effectively, but still in the back part of his career. And so I think when you combine all of those forces, it leads to must-win territory for the Boston Bruins. So they are the team that needs it the 5th most, in my opinion, in the NHL. At 4, it's the New York Rangers. I have said before, I like this Rangers team a lot. Panarin is legitimately one of my favorite players in the NHL, and Mika Zibanejad, ditto. And so, like, there are pieces on this team that I really, really, really like. But I do also have some concerns, again, about maybe a lack of playoff success. This has been one of the best teams in the league for a minute now, and it still hasn't really clicked in the way that they would want it to. If we're going to hold the Boston Bruins record against them, I guess the Rangers, they do make it to the conference finals here this last go around. Actually, you know what? They've been in the conference finals 2 of the last 3 years. Maybe I'm overstating the lack of playoff success. Because before that, they had the first round loss against the Devils. They didn't qualify for the playoffs in 20 and 21. And actually, that was 4 years in a row. They technically didn't qualify for the postseason. So maybe I'm still stuck in that. But either way, their time is now. When you look at having one of the best goaltenders in the league, one of the best players in the league in Artemi Panarin, one of the best defensemen in the league Adam Fox, then all of a sudden, this is a team that I think should be doing a little bit better than they have been and needs to start to really build some things up here. So I do think that there is a lot of pressure on the New York Rangers. The team with the third most amount of pressure on them this year, the Vegas Golden Knights. Hey, Crash Andrews. How's it going? Thanks for joining the chat. And also, I believe we just had an influx of people here. So yes, we're doing a bit of NHL right now, and then we're going to get to the fantasy football in just a second. At number 3, it's the Vegas Golden Knights. They just won the Stanley Cup very, very recently. But I feel like when you run a team the way Vegas does, there is kind of a proof of concept that is needed when you are constantly, hey, Toxic, how's it going? When you are constantly out there moving players and just, okay, well, we traded this for this guy. He is the apple of our eye. This is so nice to see. By the way, we've just traded you to Buffalo, so deal with that. When you are constantly moving players in and out and trying to circumvent things the way they have, which again, totally legal, but when you do that, you do have to continue to win. Vegas did not do that last year. There's pressure on them to do it this year. At 2, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs because they're the Maple Leafs. But also, this is kind of the last dance for this group, which, again, I apologize for continuing to be one of the people who overuses that. And so, oh, thank you, Crash. I really appreciate that. I appreciate that quite a bit. Thank you. For the Leafs, like, again, I said this is the last dance. This is not a team that has had the success even close to the Chicago Bulls. They are to losing what the Bulls were to winning in the playoffs anyway. But still, this is the last go around probably for Matthews, Nylander, Marner, and Tavares, and Riley. I think we can all agree on that one as well. So I do think that there is quite a bit of pressure on Toronto this year to find a proof of concept. Listening to the CJ show with CJ and Julian. Yes, I still listen to some shows on that network. One. But listening to them, you have they were talking about what would be the funniest thing to happen to your team. And I think they said for the Leafs is like, Marner comes out and has just a blowaway playoffs and this team makes like the Eastern Conference Finals. That would be hilarious. That would be absolutely amazing. I would greatly appreciate that. I think it would be just a whole lot of fun if that was a thing that that ended up happening with them. And so I do think that there is quite a bit of pressure on the Toronto Maple Leafs to try to make something like that happen here this year. And the number 1 team with the most pressure on them is the Edmonton Oilers. They finally make it to the promised land within Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. And wouldn't you know it, they come up just a little bit short. They do, I still think, again, I know, Toxic, I know, that the Oilers, we don't want them to do it, but they kind of need to. When you have Draisaitl, when you have McDavid, when you have a Draisaitl extension coming up that is going to be expensive, and you have a McDavid contract that is coming up that's going to be expensive, there's a lot of pressure to win now. And when you give up on future assets like Holloway and Broberg in the way they did, the pressure is on in Edmonton. I don't think I'm breaking news with that, but the pressure is absolutely 100% on with the Edmonton Oilers. So they are the team that needs it the most in the NHL for the 2024-2025 season. Every year in the NHL, we have some teams that were playoff teams a year ago that find themselves on the outside looking in. And the opposite, some teams that couldn't quite get over that hump last year finally get into the 16-team dance this year. And so today, we're going to try to predict who they are. We got 5 coming out and 5 going in. Let's start with the teams that are coming out, because we need space for these new teams entering our dance. And admittedly, when you look at the name power of the out and then the name power of the in, I don't know if it's exactly what the NHL would want, but I do think that there is still some intrigue here. So let's start first with the out. And at number 5, I don't know, like, they are kind of 5 because I just needed 5. Quite frankly, because I found 5 on the in, and, lists are better when they're top 5, right? So I have Vancouver. I do think that there is a world where the goaltending situation just doesn't correct itself, right? Like, Thatcher Demko is dealing with an injury that they don't, you see the quotes out of camp, and it doesn't totally feel like they have a grasp on it, and that feels concerning to me. You combine that with, like, a lot went well for them last year. Like, I just can't believe that JT Miller is going to be that good again. And like Elias Pettersson was on another level for a while, and like they got some very good play from their depth forwards as well. And it felt like last year was a everything is going right for Vancouver year. And so I do think that there is a opportunity for them to maybe step back a little bit. Now, stepping back a little bit for a team that finished first in their division and was within a stone's throw of the President's Trophy again, like that is a large falling off. And so this is why they're at number 5. I do think it would take a bit of catastrophe for them to fall off, or one team to be so much better than we thought they were going to be and moving into that spot. But I do think that they are a team that has the potential to fall out. At 4, it's the Los Angeles Kings. They once again got just curb stomped by the Edmonton Oilers, and they go out and acquire Pierre-Luc. No, they didn't. They got rid of Pierre-Luc Dubois. So that helps. They maybe kind of figured out the goaltending situation, so that maybe also helps. But there still feels like there's something lacking. And also, it does kind of feel like Drew Doughty is fading a little bit, and they don't really have the blue line to help make up for that. And so I just feel like there is maybe a little bit of a falling off, as like what we kind of thought there was a lot of these young pieces and you got excited about it, and they traded a few of them away for PLD, and I think that set the franchise back a little bit. Now they still made the playoffs, but now you look at kind of those younger depth pieces that are supposed to be pushing up, they're not in the way that I think they need to. Byfield looks like he could have another really good year after a great year last year, but I just don't know if there is enough there to make up for some of the other guys who are starting to fall off a little bit. And I still have some concerns about the goaltending situation. At 3, the Winnipeg Jets. Last season, everything kind of clicked for them until the playoffs. But like they were a team that legitimately I thought could win the Stanley Cup. But that was, again, with Connor Hellebuck playing like the best goalie in the world for some really long stretches and getting some very strong performances out of a few of your guys. Now this year, you have a controversy around Ehlers. There was the whole thing with the prospect who didn't want to be there. And I think that this is actually quite a good team and just kind of needed to pick some ones to fill into the spot. But when you're looking at the teams out west who have the chance to maybe fall off a little bit, there are just, quite frankly, a lot of very good teams. And I don't think Dallas falls out to the point where they're out of the playoffs. I don't think Colorado falls out to the point where they're out of the playoffs. And like Nashville got quite a bit better this year. So where else are you going to fall? And that could be a little bit of it too, is that there are just some other teams who are pushing up and making life a little bit more difficult on Winnipeg. The next 2 are out east, the New York Islanders. And I know, I perpetually underrate the New York Islanders. I still, for the 5th year in a row, just don't think they're good enough to make the playoffs. I like a couple of the pieces that they have, but I just don't think that they are about that life and are a team that I see really making a push into the playoffs this year. I think because there are a couple of other improving teams out east, that they kind of get knocked off here. And I think there's been a couple of times where it's felt they kind of got in a bit by default because some of these younger teams just couldn't quite get over that hump. And at number 1, it's Washington. They were the ones who traded for Pierre-Luc Dubois. I have concerns about that. They go out and acquire Andrew Mangiapane. If you guys listened to any of my Flame stuff last year, you know I was not super high on the kid. And I worry that they are going to expect the 35 goal scorer that was there a couple of years ago, who's not anymore. I worry about that. And they had a goalie get hot for the first time in his career, and it got them to the playoffs. I don't know if I have confidence that happens again. And so I think Washington is the team that I do think falls out here when we get into it this season. And then the teams now that get into the playoffs. Sorry, I just got a thing on my OBS that says welcome to the chat. So hopefully I didn't miss a whole lot here. But looks like everything is going fine now. Anyway, the teams that are going into the playoffs now. At 5, it's Utah. They go out and acquire Sergachev. This was a team I thought that could make a run into the playoffs last year. And then you had the whole where are they going to live situation, and where there was just so much negativity around the arena, around being in Arizona, about potentially moving, and all of that I think it just kind of became too much of a distraction for them to overcome. I think now that they are in a new place, reinvigorated, all of that, I think that this is a team that makes the bump into the playoffs this year. At 4, it is the Minnesota Wild. I think injuries really hindered this team last year. They are now just about out of the purgatory for toxic. Yes, I did. Yes. Doing this part today, saying, oh yeah, Utah's going to make it into the playoffs after they did the own goal last night in the preseason. Yeah, it's not great. It doesn't help me all that much. And so, yeah, that's it's mildly concerning. It's a problem. But I do think that there is a team there that can really make a push. For Minnesota now, this is a team that was hampered by injuries a lot last year. And now they are coming in, and I think that, Kaprizov is still one of the best players in the league, man. And Eriksson Ek, I think, doesn't get enough credit. They have this cap situation that's been hanging over them for a while that is coming towards an end anyway. And so I think that there is some reason for optimism out in Minnesota. At 3, it's Seattle. I didn't love what they did this offseason in terms of long-term contracts, but Montour and Stevenson make this a better hockey team than they were last year. And so I think with another year of development for some of the young guys, and now adding a couple of very good playoff-proven pieces, that this is a Seattle team that can push for the playoffs. At 2, it's Montreal. This is assuming that there is some growth in Patrick Laine, and he just kind of gets back into being the guy that he was a few years ago, and the guy we all thought he could be. But I think, my breakout player of the year this year is Cole Caulfield. Slafkovsky was on that list as well. They have all these guys who I think are these young players who can take this step into being that type of a caliber of player, and that will really help them going forward. And I think that this is a team now that takes that step, that is done rebuilding. They have a couple of pieces on the blue line that you don't mind. And I have said before, there's some advancement that needs to be done tactically and from quite a few players to get them there. But I do think that they are ready to take that next step into the postseason. And at 1, it's cheating a little bit, but it's New Jersey. I thought they could have been legitimately a Stanley Cup contender last year if they would have acquired Tanev and Markstrom from the Flames. They got neither and missed the playoffs. But now they made a big move in the offseason to get a defenseman. They made a big move in the offseason to get the goalie Markstrom. This is a team that feels complete. And yet Hughes' injury sucks, but this is a team that feels complete right now and feels like they can make a real run, not just at a playoff spot, but a very high seed in the Eastern Conference, and then do some damage in the postseason. Yes, every year there are a few players who kind of hold the fate of the NHL in their hands. And so again, this list isn't necessarily the best players or who's going to dominate the league, but these are 5 players who have a chance to swing how the National Hockey League goes this season. Coming in at number 5, it's Jake Guentzel. He or Stamkos have popped up on basically every list that he is or that we have done here so far. And that has been a bit surprising as I've been going through, but it's been the easy one. Just be like, oh yeah, nope, that guy. Lock that one in. There we go. Guentzel, I do think is a good player, and I do think I have been a little bit hard on him in this. But I do think that the expectation that he will just fill in for Steven Stamkos and everything will be fine after Stamkos had 40 goals in 2 of the last 3 seasons, I think is a little bit pie in the sky, so to speak, for this team. I think that Guentzel is good. I think he has a few great qualities. I do not think that he is an overall great, difference maker type of a guy that Stamkos is. Now, if I'm wrong on that, then the Tampa Bay Lightning are a real threat again in the NBA or in the NHL, in the Eastern Conference. When you have Point and Kucherov still doing their thing, if Guentzel can just go out there and just continue to light the lamp and maybe be an improvement over a Steven Stamkos, then all of a sudden this Lightning team that felt like they were starting to fade away a little bit, all of a sudden they got something to say about everything in the Eastern Conference. I don't know if he alone and his play can help get them to a Stanley Cup, which is why I have them at 5. But I do think that he has an opportunity to really decide how things go in Tampa Bay, and that creates some opportunities for people in the for other teams in the East, and some opportunities for some teams at the top of the East to move on maybe a little bit further. At 4, it's Elias Pettersson. He played at an unreal rate for a lot of last season, and that helped the Vancouver Canucks get to within a game of the Western Conference Final in the postseason. Now, this year, he is going to have to be great again. They are asking, I think, quite a bit of him with the young Lekaramaki playing on his line, at least to start. That's a player that I've said before that I like. If he is able to get the most out of those guys again, Höglander and Lekaramaki, then you have a Canucks team that, again, feels quite deep, and a Canucks team that feels quite dangerous, and one that, if the goalies are also healthy, so maybe this is a Elias Pettersson / Thatcher Demko, because if those two guys are on, then within the range of outcomes for Vancouver is winning the Stanley Cup. Like, they can be that good. But if Elias Pettersson is almost anything under a Hart Trophy candidate, I do worry, and we talked about this the other day on Who's In, Who's Out NHL Playoff Edition. I do worry. Oh, I forgot my dog was in here. That Pettersson and the Canucks maybe take a bit of a step back this year. And again, that now opens the door for a team like a Seattle, maybe an LA, to move up a little bit more. Probably not a Calgary in the Pacific Division. Vegas takes over that opening from going from the wild card into a top 3 spot, and I think really shifts the dynamic out west. But if Pettersson can get going and kind of stay going, because he was very good last year, if he can be that guy, then I think Vancouver can be that team. At 3, Kaapo Kakko with the New York Rangers. Last year, we saw the Rangers take, I think, a pretty significant step forward because of Alexis Lafreniere. He was great in the playoffs at times where Panarin wasn't, and he was the star player at times where their other guys weren't. And that, I think, allowed the Rangers to rise up to another level. And while, again, love the talent on this Rangers team, with the aforementioned Lafreniere, I gush about Panarin any chance I get. Same thing with Zibanejad. In Calgary, we don't like Fox, but he's pretty good at hockey. You have one of the best goalies in the world back between the pipes as well. Kreider is just an absolute beast and has people in various Canadian markets very upset with him over ways he has attacked goalies over the years, but is still quite talented at the sport of hockey. They have so many great pieces. It does kind of feel like if Kakko can kind of turn into the guy we expected him to be when he was drafted very high by the Rangers a few years ago, then there is a very good opportunity for the Rangers to be a very legitimate Stanley Cup threat. They are right there, and I just feel like Kaapo Kakko can be that piece to carry them kind of over the finish line, and so that is why I have him on this list. At 2, it is Cole Caulfield. And maybe I should have him a little bit lower because I don't think that he can alter the course of Montreal to the point where they are a Stanley Cup champion, the way that I have just talked about the Rangers and I have just talked about the Canucks and I guess the Lightning to a certain degree. But I do think that Cole Caulfield has an opportunity to really help carry this Montreal team to the playoffs. And that is, I think, a pretty big step for them, and I think would be very intriguing. And now that they've gone out and added Line A as well, if he can be the Line A again that we all think he can be, this is a really good, really exciting group, but they have needed that star for a little bit. If Cole Caulfield just turns into that guy, then this might be a Montreal team that takes more than a couple of steps this year. And again, I'm not saying Stanley Cup final or Eastern Conference final even, but I do think that this is a team that has quite a bit of talent, and they are one that I think can cause some real problems out east. And we have already talked about, like, there are a lot of very good teams in the Eastern Conference, and probably a couple of them are going to miss the playoffs. And Montreal has an opportunity, I think, to dictate that a little bit as well. And coming in at number 1, it is Mitch Marner. I think he has a way to decide this season, by just playing like Mitch Marner can, and just using everything that has happened this offseason as fuel, and just being like a, hey, fuck all y'all kind of a guy, and go out there and really light the lamp and take over for the Toronto Maple Leafs and be that dynamic offensive player that we all know he can be. I think he's legitimately one of the most talented guys in the NHL. If he can turn it on in the playoffs, if whatever thing that is on his shoulders when it gets past the point of the regular season, and instead of game whatever of 82, it is just game 1. Whatever thing that is holding him there, if he can just transfer regular season him into postseason him, and I get we are asking for something that hasn't really happened before, but if he can just do that, then this Leafs team, this last run with the Leafs, I jokingly said Last Dance the other day. I'm not going to do that anymore because that is disrespectful to the Last Dance, because that was at the end of 6 championships for the Bulls, not 6 playoff game wins or playoff game appearances for an NHL team. But I do think that Mitch Marner has an opportunity. If he can just figure out the playoff part of it and kind of drag a couple of his guys there, then this team can make some very substantial noise in the Eastern Conference playoff picture. The other option, and the one that is a little bit more chaos, if he just decide, hey, you know what? I am going to waive it. Trade me. And then we have just mass everything going on across the NHL. And he is the one who can just kind of launch a smoke bomb into the entire the trade frenzy thingy mabob that is going on. And so I do not anticipate that option actually happening. But because he has that little one to play, I do think he could be very interesting. A couple from the chat on the Calgary Flames. Deeds, how fun was Cooley to watch last night? And Dude's interviews are like listening to your beer league goalie talk about his game. Yeah, he is overflowing with personality. I still think that he is going to be overflowing with personality as the Wranglers' #1 goalie this year. He'll probably make some NHL appearances because, goalies get hurt. But I still think of the 3 that are in the battle for the job, he's 3rd. And I think pretty solidly number 3. But no, he was so much fun last night. And I do think that he is a player that is interesting. And you do need guys like that. And you do need guys who can really just, bump up those spirits, especially if you're playing down in the American Hockey League. And so I think that he is someone who will be a welcome addition for whether it's the American Hockey League or whoever it is. I think that there is something there for sure. Goalies get hurt, Vladar gets moved at the deadline, etc. Yeah, no, there is absolutely a world where he can come in and have a bit of an impact for this team. So maybe not a big one, but yeah, that's kind of why I'm here, is to show that I don't suck that much, and hopefully I can help this team get some wins in the regular season. Yeah, who doesn't love an eccentric backup goalie, and especially preseason, man, to kind of break up some of the monotony when this thing starts to drag on a little bit. By the way, just recorded, will not be up yet, but very, very soon on the Game Over YouTube channel. I just did a quick little, not as in-depth as we'll go for game overs in the regular season, but just a quick little on the first couple preseason games for the Flames. Admittedly, I didn't watch the one out in Edmonton. It required signing up for Oilers Plus, and I'm not going to do that, and then had some stuff to do today, and a 10-minute recap video just wasn't going to shoehorn in. But saw a few of the clips on Twitter. Things looked good. So yeah, over on Game Over Calgary, very, very soon, I will be looking at the players that have stood out in a good way, looking at a couple of things I'm a little bit concerned with, and what I think about the lineup going forward. At least for now. Again, all of it with the caveat that it is still very early in the preseason. But there's at least, I think, a little bit to like about this Calgary Flames team. And a couple of pieces that I think can actually provide a nice little bit of comfort for you as we kind of get into the start of the season. So a bit more over, again, go subscribe right now. I'm going to throw this in the chat, which is probably why I've been stumbling a little bit, although probably not more than usual. Throwing it in there right now. Yeah, youtube.com/Game Over Calgary. Go subscribe there. You can find us on the internet at shit, I had this written down. I'm pretty sure it is the Game Over Network. thegameovernetwork.com. You can find us on social media. We are at Game Over NHL on TikTok and X, and we are Game Over Calgary on Game Over Network on YouTube and Instagram. That was all not as smooth as I wanted that to be, but go subscribe. We'd really appreciate it, and want to do a few more of those over on the Game Over Network. By the way, the audio from that is going to be up in podcast form on Couch Potato Diary, and also it's going to be a little bonus action for you guys before tomorrow's stream. I'm going to stream it live. I'll be in the chat chatting with you guys, but we'll play the pre-recorded things. So that is going to be. That's kind of the plan, but still go subscribe over Game Over Calgary, and we will get that going. I'm thinking Hansik's game is growing as the preseason goes on. Do you agree? 100% I do. I don't know if it's growing to the point where he can make the NHL roster, but I have very much liked what I've seen from him so far. And look, they've won 3 of their games by like a combined 100, so there's going to be a lot of positives, but I think he has been a very nice sign so far, and one that I feel like he is going to be someone who is going to have to grow into a bit more things at the AHL level. But I think he's going to be one where by the time we're here again next year, he's going to be a guy that we're going to be talking about okay, we need to find a way to get this kid on the team. And there's actually a few of those right now for the Flames. But yes, all of that talked about over on Game Over Calgary, probably in the next hour and a bit or so. Yeah, no, I would agree, Toxic. I would keep him in the A, but I do think his game is growing. Are you going to be doing all the post-game shows there? Not all of them. Lord, no, not all of them. But certainly some of them. And I would... I even hesitate to say most, but I will definitely be part of the cast over at Game Over Calgary this year. And also, just the Game Over Network in general. We're doing a whole lot of stuff. There on the national side. That's a whole lot of fun. Conrad, I completely agree with you, but not entirely my call. So, yes, a lot there on the Flamesy part of the conversation. So, yes, again, to summarize, Game Over Calgary, YouTube channel. I will be talking about Flames prospects. You should go watch that, but you can also listen to it audio form, and I'll have a bonus stream of it here, so we can all chat about it as it goes on. It's kind of a pre-show meeting before to tomorrow's live stream. All right, the NHL season is very rapidly approaching. Preseason games are already underway, and so we are getting into the crunch time of it. And so today, I want to look at the teams that we think can make that jump from worst to first. Now, this is different from I do this in the NFL, and it's different because there are 8 divisions that we can run through. And so you have a choice of 1 through 8. But with this, there's 4. And I like to do lists of 5, and so just the math doesn't work. And so I have altered it slightly to make it teams that can go from the worst to first in their division in the NHL this year. And so we start at number 5. Oh, hey, Soham04, how's it going? Thanks for popping in today. Really appreciate it. And thanks for the follow. I really do appreciate that. Thank you very much. We're talking some NHL right now. Teams that have a chance to go from worst to in their division to first in the NHL. And I'm going to start with the Anaheim Ducks. They come in at number 5, and they're at 5 because they are in a difficult division. It would be slightly miraculous if they were able to pull this off with Vegas in the division, with Edmonton and Vancouver and the Kings and all of those teams. Very talented division, be the Pacific. But I do think when you look at Anaheim, there is a real opportunity here for some of these kids to finally progress and really work into that role. We saw on the Flames video game stream what John Gibson is capable of doing, but they have so many really exciting young pieces. It just feels like now's the time. It kind of felt like last year might have been, but injuries really did slow this group up. But you now have some very good, very exciting young pieces that can take this jump. And so if there is a team like that is kind of the recipe, right? Like you have some injury problems. You have, and honestly, I think some of the young players have kind of outplayed their stats anyway. But you have some young pieces that are ready to take that big step all at the same time. And so that is why I think Anaheim can be one of those teams. And so putting them in worst to first does maybe feel a little bit exaggerated, but I do want to put them on this list as a team that I think can make a big jump this year. At 4, I have Chicago. Yes, the Central Division, stacked. right? You have Dallas, you have Colorado. I still think Winnipeg is going to be good. Nashville kind of loaded up this year. But the Chicago Blackhawks now get a full year of Connor Bedard, we assume. They have gone out and added some better veteran pieces around. You are going to get, presumably, a full year of health from Taylor Hall to go along with the Bertuzzi that you add. And you now have like an actual kind of NHL roster here around a talent that feels special already. And so I do think that if a team is going to make a jump, Connor Bedard being on that team seems like a pretty good shot to me. So I think Chicago is in a world. Also, you have Chicago who, like, they have some pieces they can move if they want to make a push and really go for it. So I think that they could be, given the fact that their star is making like, what, $925,000, I think that you can now make a push with that team and move them into a spot where it becomes a real contender in the NHL. And so I think Chicago makes this list for those reasons. At 3, it's Utah. We talked about them the other day as a team that was out of the playoffs that can make it in this year. They acquire Sergachev, who I think is fantastic on that blue line. They were aggressive in trades and free agency. And honestly, they were a team that we all thought was going to take a step last year, but then you have all the madness of everything that went on around Arizona, where no, we're not moving. No, we're not leaving. No, Utah's got great skiing. Why, of course we were visiting there. They also have this rink, and they do have this owner, and we're basically playing in like a small town arena here. So you know what, like maybe, just maybe. And you have all those things kind of going on in these guys' heads about, okay, am I going to have to move from Arizona to Utah? Where am I going to go? Why am I dressing in the science lab? Like, what are we doing here? Why? And so things just spiraled. But I do think now, having that stability, having a very excited fan base behind you, no shade on Arizona, but having a very excited actual NHL building behind you, having maybe even a home ice advantage, gasp, would be a very exciting thing. I just think that this is a Utah team that, again, has an opportunity. They have a lot of talent that just had a lot going on around them. And so I think if they took the step that we thought they were going to take last year, this would seem very reasonable that they could go out and make some noise in this division. And so that's why I have them at 3. At 2, it's Montreal. You guys have kind of figured out by now, if you've been watching every day, I am quite high on the Canadiens this year. I think that this is a team that has superstar potential in a guy like Caulfield. I think adding Patrick Laine, again, if he can stay right, that is a scoring punch that this team needed desperately. I think that you have a great forward group. I think you have some pieces on the blue line that, if it hits, can be quite good. The goaltending situation does kind of need to get figured out, but it does seem like they have a couple guys who could also take a step. So this is another one where it feels like everything has been building, and now Montreal has a chance to really push forward. And we have seen sometimes some young teams take a couple steps. And so I think Montreal has that opportunity there. But at number 1, this one seems like cheating. It's the New Jersey Devils. They got ravaged by injuries on the blue line last year, ravaged by inconsistent goaltending play last season, but there's so much talent on this roster. And then going out and adding Shea and adding Jacob Markstrom make this a legitimate championship threat in the Eastern Conference. And so that makes them the best option to go from worst to first in the NHL this season. So my cat has been sound asleep beside me the entire morning, and now that I have started talking, she just has to come in and get her camera time. So she'll blend in with my black sweater. Don't worry about it. You'll barely notice her. I will, because she will bite my beard, but we'll be fine. Anyway, so, oh yeah, no, there we go. Leaving already. And stepping on the keyboard. That's going to be helpful. Okay, so this NHL season, and, anytime with this job, really, with previews and stuff like that, it doesn't help to come on and say, I don't know. That was one thing I was told very early on in my career, is like, you say I don't know a lot. Just, like, don't do that. And I still think I say I don't know a fair amount, but I do try to, you want to come down one side or the other, and so let's lock in. These are the things that I think. But I still have enough humility and grace, really, that I am aware that I could be wrong on some shit. And so today, I hope you're not adjusting the volume while you're doing that. So today, we are going, what a shit show to start. Going to be starting with a look at the things that I am worried I am wrong about in the National Hockey League this season. So, number 5. Hey, Bailey Bello says below. Number 5. The impact of the better situation out in Utah. I have been saying on here for a little bit that I think the Utah Yeti HC Jazz team will have a really good opportunity to make the postseason this year. I thought that they had a very good team that was ready to take a step last year, and then, where are you going to live? Why does this arena suck so bad? Hey, what are your thoughts on Salt Lake City? Have you ever thought of Salt Lake City before in your life? All of these different things start to come up. It causes a bit of a distraction. They lose like 13 games in a row, and everything goes to hell very, very quickly. They're not going to have that this year. I'm going to assume they're not moving out of Utah year 1. That would be quite the thing. And if it is, whatever. That is going to be a very tricky team to figure out. But I do think that this is a team that has quite a bit of talent. They go out and acquire Sergachev. There's already a lot of young pieces there that you feel very excited about. And so I think that Utah is going to take a step this year. But I am worried that I am just kind of whistling past the graveyard when it comes to some of the struggles and just assuming none of them were hockey related and all of them were life distraction oriented. So I am worried that I'm just going to be wrong about that. Where is Salt in Lake City? I'm sure they have salt everywhere in Salt Lake City. I've never been. It seems like a lovely place, though. They had an Olympics. Number 4, maybe the Rangers just aren't as good as I think they are. I'm not unique in the thought that the New York Rangers are going to be a very good hockey team this year, but I do think that this is a group that is ready for a run towards the Stanley Cup. And I'm a little bit worried, though, as time goes on, and it just doesn't really click ever. And they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. So this isn't a bum of a hockey team or anything like that, but they also didn't play great in the playoffs, right? Like they got, whether it was a timely goal at a right time, like they were kind of outplayed soundly throughout many parts of games against like Carolina and stuff like that. And they just happened to keep winning those games. And so that has kind of stuck with me in the back of my mind, is that maybe this team's window is closing a little bit more rapidly than I think it is. And so that kind of concerns me a little bit. And number 3, the development of the kids in Montreal. I have said that like my breakout players list had 2 players on the Habs on it, with Cole Caulfield breaking out from already being a breakout. I think that he moves into superstar status this year. And Uri Slavkovsky, I think, takes a big jump in Montreal this season. Those are the kids, Bello, that I am talking about. Those are the guys that I think have an opportunity. And like another year of Nick Suzuki, I think on the blue line, they have a couple of guys, Gooley and such, that have an opportunity to progress a little bit. But there is also, again, the thought of, everyone has thought, like Buffalo has been waiting for that breakout for like 4 years. Ditto in Ottawa. And Detroit to a certain extent, although they were actually in the playoff race until the last day of the regular season this last year. So I am thinking that Montreal's talent is good enough that they can kind of jump the line a little bit. But if that talent doesn't take the big jump in the way that I think it does, and probably specifically in net, then this team isn't going to have the big advances that I think they're going to have. And me having Montreal in basically every list that I have done previewing the season this year will have been an entire waste of time. At 2, Markstrom being the missing piece in New Jersey. We have all talked about it. You see the hat, based out here in Calgary, talked about the Markstrom trade ad nauseum. By the way, if you want a full breakdown of that, if you just want a nice refresher, Game Over Calgary, I have a video up on the Game Over Calgary YouTube channel. So just go check that one out and check out the preseason reaction there from me. But quick recap, last year, trade deadline, I said that New Jersey had a chance to win the Stanley Cup if they made a move to go out and get Tanev and Markstrom from the Flames. They decided to get none of them, instead getting Jake Allen, which did not lead to even playoffs, let alone a run toward the Stanley Cup. But now they make the big acquisition in the offseason for Shea. They go out and get Jacob Markstrom, who, to Deeds' point, also, hello Deeds, Markstrom, fantastic mask elite mask game. We don't have enough good masks. I think we need to talk about that a little bit more. I shouldn't say that. We have some good masks. We don't have a lot that stand out. We don't have a lot of unique. I feel like we need to focus on these a little bit more. Anyway, I'm rambling. I feel like Markstrom's the missing piece in New Jersey. I feel like this is a guy who, when he is at his best, is the type of goaltender that this team needs to get them to the promised land. Like, I genuinely think New Jersey is in that circle of teams that can win the Stanley Cup this year. And so, there are a few ways I can be wrong in that. That's really hard to do, just in general. Being a team that can win the Stanley Cup, there are but a few of them. And so, like, there's a lot of gap between where they were and where I think they can be, and a lot can go wrong in this spot here. We are coming off of a season where Jacob Markstrom was very good. That was coming off of a season where Jacob Markstrom was really bad. And goalies tend to not, at his age, tend to not just, oh yeah, no, bad season, rock it up again, here we go. That tends to not be the case. So there is absolutely a world where Markstrom isn't as good as I think he is. This team isn't as good as they think they are. Already, Hughes dealing with an injury out there. Also, the East, quite good. And that division, at least at the top, quite good. And so there are a few ways where that one kind of goes wrong. And I'm a little bit concerned about that. And the number one thing I am worried about in the NHL previews this year, Steven Stamkos' impact on leaving the Tampa Bay Lightning. I have come on here a number of times and said, also, when I pop in at 960 when they let me, I have said that people are kind of sleeping on the impact Steven Stamkos had on Tampa Bay. And I know for a bit being like, Steven Stamkos, kind of underrated. No one's talking about how good this guy is. That seems a little extreme. But I do think that there comes a point where, okay, he's old, he's heading toward free agency, it's just going to be a whatever, he's actually not that good, he's just a veteran guy, and we just remember the good old days. You tend to, once a guy hits a certain age, and quite frankly, a point in their contract, you start to be like, okay, yeah, whatever. And he's also had the injury issues, right? So I think people just kind of write off what Stamkos can do. But 2 40-goal seasons in the last 3 years is nothing to scoff at. And I still think he's a better hockey player than Jake Gensel is. And so while maybe this does set them up long-term a little bit better out in Tampa Bay, I think that this year there's going to be a bit of an adjustment and there's going to be a bit of a step back. And I also think that there was an emotional component to this out in Tampa Bay. And like CJ brought up on his show with Julian, I think it was a week ago, I'm behind, but talking about how Vasilevsky was like, yeah, tell Stam, I've already told Stamkos, like, just be kind on the one goal you get on me this year, because he's definitely going to get one, and all this stuff. Like they're waxing poetic about him, and I worry that all of that is going to kind of damage things out in Tampa a little bit. I'm also worried that I've maybe gone a little bit too hard on the Jake Gensel isn't Steven Stamkos thing. I don't want it to seem like I think Jake Gensel is dog shit, and he is just the, Ensign Carter out there with the Sedin twins. And not that Ensign Carter was dog shit, but you know what I mean. That he's just this overrated whatever who just happened to have good line mates. That's not the case. Gensel is quite good at the sport of hockey. And thusly, I think he is going to have probably some pretty good years, pretty good games this year with Tampa Bay, and probably put up some pretty big point totals. But I do think that there is a step back coming for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I missed this in the last part, so apologies, Deeds. Wolf needs to get the Trevor Kidd treatment and have a wolf instead of a dragon on his mask. The backplate could be a moon. Yeah, how do you not? Right? Like, and even like with the Flames, you could have a fiery moon, but like a subtly fiery moon. Not the moon is on fire, but just like a subtle fire in there and all of that. There's definitely something there. And Deeds also saying Sabres and Devils in the playoffs, Lightning and Islanders are out. I would agree. The Sabres one, I can't get there just yet with the Sabres. We'll get into the full team previews in a little bit, next week probably. I think they need a little bit more offense, and the goaltending needs to not scare me as much. But they definitely could. Like, there is a number of different universes where that team makes the playoffs this year. Toxic, I'll get to the Flames thing in a bit here for sure. But yeah, we're going to be talking Flames in a little bit. But we're going to start with the win or the point projections. I keep saying wins. It's not that. We're not saying, although I do feel comfortable in saying Boston's going to get under 99.5 wins this year. But this is the point totals that we're going to be running through. So, like I do for every other sport, going to run through each team. There's a couple that the odds just weren't there for. So yeah, just going to run through every team over under on their point predictions, and then we'll give the playoff predictions at the end. Cool? Cool. All right, let's begin in the Eastern Conference. We're going alphabetically with the Boston Bruins. Their total is at 99.5. I have under. I just feel like there's a little tumult in Boston right now with what's going on with the goaltending situation and all of those sorts of things. It feels concerning that they don't have their goalie locked up, and they seem to be fighting with him now. Also, I know the last 3 years, but you know what? This is the year Boston falls out. You know what? This is when this is going to be the time Boston Bruins going to completely collapse and fall apart. This is going to be the year. And then it ends up not being the year. But I do think that this is going to be a team that doesn't get to 100 points this year. I think adding Lindholm and adding Zadorov are good pieces, but Lindholm kind of saved his value with a really good postseason last year, but he was not very good in the regular season. Zadorov is an upgrade for a bit, but again, I think that they're going to be asking maybe a little bit too much of him. And so I don't see this as being the year that Boston rockets again to the top of the standings. The Buffalo Sabres, I have them under 89.5. That this is absolutely a team that I have bought in on before. I think this has the potential to be one of the best blue lines in the NHL. I have questions about the goaltending, and I have questions about where the other goals are coming from. Tage Thompson is obviously a beast. I just don't know if they have added enough around him to create the offense that's going to be needed in a really, really competitive Eastern Conference to be able to take that step and move forward. So I have Buffalo coming in under 89.5 this year. Carolina, 100.5. I have them over. I was saying once they were done, hey, watch out, because they're going to lose some pieces. And this is not a team that I think this is a team that maybe takes a step back. But I do think that they kind of weathered that storm a little bit with a couple of the moves that they made, bringing in guys like Walker and all of that. And then, you keep that core with Aho and all of those guys around. This is still a very talented hockey team. I do have concerns about the goaltending. I do think they have the best coach in the league. But I think that they lost quite a few big pieces, but it was pieces from a blue line that was kind of stacked. And now they just have a regular blue line, but still a lot of very good, very talented players. So I have Carolina going over 100.5. Columbus, there was no win total for. I think there's some pretty obvious distractions out in Columbus, given everything that happened with Johnny Gaudreau. I think that this could be a very difficult year for them. I was a little skeptical on the team anyway, and then all of that happened. And so you can absolutely understand it, but I don't think this is going to be a great year out in Columbus. I mean... Yeah, it is a very difficult situation, and it feels glib to be analyzing what Johnny Gaudreau not being there means from a hockey standpoint, because it's obviously a very emotional, very raw story. But, I mean, again, from a hockey standpoint, he's not going to be there. Laine is gone. Monahan is there, but he's been banged up. I like a lot of the young pieces, but I think I think things have shifted dramatically out there for very, very obvious reasons. The Detroit Red Wings, I have them over 89.5. They were right there on the cusp of a playoff spot last year. I like so many of their pieces. And I get they have had a contentious offseason with some of their players as well. But there is, I just think, so much young talent on this hockey team. DeBrincat, that start that he got off to last year, and then things cooled off a little bit. But I do think that there is a lot of really high-end talent with this group. And I think they're going to be able to finally break through and make it back into the postseason. The Florida Panthers, their total is at 101.5. I have them going over that. I get that they lost Montour. I get that their offseason was 45 minutes, and so maybe there is a bit of a hangover, and they kind of go the Kansas City Chief route from last year where, yeah, we're just going to let's just get in. We're not going to battle for the President's Trophy or anything like that. Let's just kind of ease our way in, make sure we can make it into the playoffs, and then do our damage there. But they still have a very good goaltending situation, obviously. Ekblad and Forsling aren't gone. Montour leaving does suck. But I mean, this is still a incredibly deep forward group as well with Kachuk, Verhaeghe, Barkov, all of those guys. So this is still a team that is not to be messed with, and still one of the best teams in the National Hockey League. I mean, like in the previews before here, having them as the most talented team in the NHL. Kind of have to pick the over on them, don't I? Up next, Montreal. I have them going over. Admittedly, throughout the entire preview process, been banging the drum on Montreal, and today was going to be the big, like, yeah, that this team is for real, here we go. But losing Laine and Reinbacher and the injuries that they have had so far does kind of slow that momentum down a little bit. But I do still think that there is another level that Caulfield can get to. And I do still think that, assuming Xhekaj doesn't get suspended for the year for violently attacking everyone who he plays against in the preseason, I do think that there are steps that are going to be made from their blue line. The biggest key is going to be in goal. One of those guys has to figure it out. And obviously, like I think they were getting there. Like I think that they have put together some pretty good performances, but I do think one of those guys kind of needs to figure it out now. Up next, it is the New Jersey Devils. I have them going over 100.5. I have said before that this team, again, that they add Shea, they add Markstrom. Hughes with that injury before preseason started sucks, but I mean, the offensive talent is obviously there. They just couldn't get any stops last year, and they gave up a boatload of scoring opportunities. Well, now Dougie Hamilton's back, Brady Shea is there, and Jacob Markstrom should be awesome. So I'm going to go over 100.5 on the Devils. Next, it's the Islanders at 91.5. I continue to underestimate this team, and that rolls into this season as well, because it's basically the exact same team as last year. And I still just don't see it. And I think part of what happened last year is that it's not a veteran group, but it is a well-tested organization. And as the game started to get a little bit more important, and all of a sudden Detroit's dropping big games, and but Buffalo's dropping big games, and all of those teams, they just kind of stayed the course. And so this isn't so much I think the Islanders are going to fall off, but I do think, like, Detroit's better. Obviously, I think Montreal is going to be better. I think the Devils are going to be better. And so I just think a few teams have kind of leapfrogged them a little bit, and that's going to knock them back. They do have pieces I like Barzal is really fun. Bo Horvat, I would take him on my team 1,000,000 times out of 10. I am a huge fan of his, and they have a couple guys on the blue line that you like as well, but I'm not there with them. Up next, it is the New York Rangers. Their total is at 100.5. I am there with this Rangers team, and we talked about it. I think one of the keys for this group this year is going to be the play of Kaapo Kakko. If he can be someone who we all thought he was going to be when he was taken he was second overall, right? I think that this is all of a sudden an incredibly dynamic team. It already is. You know the big pieces, right? Panarin, Zibanejad, Kreider, Fox, just silly talented hockey team up and down the lineup. Then you get the playoff experience of Lafreniere. I think they built out their bottom six really effectively to just have a deep team that is difficult to play against that can also play with a lot of speed and talent. And Lafreniere really kind of is the cherry on top of that. And if Kakko can kind of take a step here, then that is 100% a team that can go out and win the Stanley Cup. Ottawa up next. I have them under 90.5. I think they figured out the goaltending situation, and maybe they did with going out and getting Ullmark, Linus Ullmark. Oh yeah, Ullmark. But getting Ullmark, I think that does solidify the goaltending spot a little bit. And this is a flaw of mine, and I have addressed it. Anytime we do an accountability thing, it's like, yeah, you know what? Like, they made a move I didn't agree with. That doesn't mean the whole organization's going to shit. That being said, they got fucking boat raced on that Jacob Chikrin trade and just annihilated in that deal. And so I can't get there with this team. I want to, but I can't. Maybe if Norris is healthy, you can maybe get there, but I'm just there's still something missing in Ottawa for me. For Philadelphia, it is under 85.5. And to be perfectly honest with you, substantially under 85.5. I like a few of the pieces on this team, but I do think the ones that I like, the Couturier's, Lottons, those guys, we're kind of past it now. And so that concerns me a little bit with Philadelphia, is that we are just banking on a core that is still a little bit post apex here, and there hasn't been there's a couple prospects to be excited about. Obviously the goaltending situation took a rather dramatic and aggressive turn, but the Russian kid, why am I blanking on his name, but you know who I'm talking about, comes in, maybe that there's something there, but I don't think the blue line's good enough. I don't think they have nearly enough scoring on this team, again, to compete in this conference. I think that this could be just an absolute bludgeoning of the Philadelphia Flyers this year. The Pittsburgh Penguins are next, and they don't have a point total where I was looking. So apologies for that. We're not going to be able to get an over-under on that. I know the world weeps, but I do think that this is going to be another tough year in Pittsburgh. It looked like they were going to make a move between the pipes, and they kind of just didn't, which was strange. They signed Crosby to the extension, so their lease isn't that. But what makes you think that this is going to be a good hockey team this year? Like last year, all of the old guys except for Crosby fell off. You could not ask for a better Sidney Crosby season than you got last year, and just no one around it stepped up. And they added nothing to this team. So I think this is going to be rough for Pittsburgh. This next one probably shouldn't surprise you. Tampa Bay Lightning, under 99.5 points. The loss of Stamkos in that locker room and on the ice, I think is going to be for real. I think that there is going to be, not that, you have Hedman, Point, and Kucherov. There's still a lot of leadership there. John Cooper can kind of be an arrogant prick, but I think he is one of the best coaches in the NHL too. So that there is a lot there. But I do think losing Stamkos and Sergachev and replacing them with Gensel and McDonough, I view both of those as L's. And this is why I talked about them in the I'm worried I'm wrong about them, or things I'm worried about episode, because I could be, right? Like, Gensel could be the perfect fit with Kucherov and Point and just score 80 billion goals, and this team's going to ride off into prominence. And McDonough, back where he is comfortable out in Tampa Bay, isn't going to have maybe a bit of a fall off that I expected, and he is going to fit perfectly with what this team does. And Vasilevsky is going to be just one of the bright shining stars of the league one more time, and this team is going to ride off to 110 points and threaten for the President's Trophy. Maybe all of that happens. I just don't think so. I think that they're like losing your captain for a billion years and emotional leader in Steven Stamkos, and a guy who has scored 40 goals in 2 of the last 3 years, and replacing him with Jake Gensel is a loss. And I think Gensel's a fine player, but I don't think he's that guy. And then losing the athleticism and the skating ability that Sergachev has and replacing it with a relatively expensive Ryan McDonough doesn't help either. So I think Tampa Bay takes a step back this year. I have them under 99.5. The Toronto Maple Leafs at 102.5 points. I went back and forth on this one a lot, because on the one hand, every year when we go into the regular season, the last viewing experience of the Leafs has been bad because the playoffs were bad. I also think that giving a long-term contract to Tanev is the slightest bit of insane. And also, there's the whole Mitch Marner thing going on there. Oh, and you switched captains this year, which is never awkward. And so there's just a lot of noise going on. That being said, the additions they made on the blue line, while maybe not the best for the long-term security of this franchise, I think makes them better this year. And I think does improve the blue line. And this is the last go at it for this team with the core 4 or 5 or whatever you want to say. And I do think that wall between the pipes is fine. So I do think that there are a few reasons for optimism. The one thing you can say about the Leafs, they're pretty good in the regular season. So I am going over 102.5 for this Toronto Maple Leafs team. I do think the additions they made are enough to get them at least into the postseason. And then finally, we close out the NHL preview on the Eastern Conference side with the Washington Capitals. They come in at 88.5 points. I have them going under. I just don't like this team. I think that they got a goalie who got hot last year. I think to really bet the farm on that this year is maybe a little bit of fool's gold. And we'll see. Maybe Lindgren does come back and is just awesome again. But I have major concerns about that. I think that they are... To get to this number, to get to basically 90 points is what you're looking to get with a over on this. Pierre-Luc Dubois has to be the Pierre-Luc Dubois that whoever is still defending that guy thinks he can be, and Andrew Mangiapane needs to get back to being a 30-goal scorer. I don't see it happening. It was a really cool story what they were able to do when they traded off a few pieces and then all of a sudden the kids started going. But it's just, I don't think it's sustainable. I think Ovi's going to get all of his goals. I think Washington is going to be fun to watch still, but there are too many pieces on this team I don't like for me to think that this is going to be a 90-point team or a playoff team this year. So I have Washington under 88.5. The Western Conference side of the NHL preview now, as it is the Anaheim Ducks. And their point total wasn't available. So that's a bit of a bummer. What a way to start the Western Conference. But I think that this is a team that takes a step this year. I think that they have accumulated enough high-end pieces. We talked about McTavish in the breakout episode. I think that they have... a big key is going to be what Zegras is or what they can get for him. I do still think that there's obviously some holes on this team, and so maybe I am being a little optimistic about it, but I just think that their young kids are ready to take that step, and so they're not going to be a playoff team, but I think things are going to improve out in Anaheim. All right, let's go to the Calgary Flames. We got the Calgary Cannons hat on. We got Calgary Stampede shirt in the background. Well, let's talk about it. First, Toxic saying in the chat, I find out that Hansik's ELC slides for another year. I think it's best to keep him in the A this year. I am on that train. I understand it has been awesome what he has done in the preseason. I do find it weird where it's like, preseason, these games don't matter, but this guy's kicking ass in them, so let's go. It's exciting. It's exciting to see what he has done, and it is exciting to see what the progress that seems to have been made in his game. And I think that if you send him down to the American Hockey League, you have to have a very honest conversation with him to be like, look, this was awesome. Keep doing that. You going down there has nothing to do with what we think of you as a player or anything. It is just from a roster, contract, whatever. It sucks, but you are the path of least resistance going back down there. So that's what we're doing. We talked about the Pelche thing yesterday. I just think you have to kind of try to keep that guy around and on your roster. The total for the Flames is 81.5. We have talked before. I do not know how you get to this team being a 500 hockey team. I think, 80 points last year? And that was with all of those guys who they traded away, at least playing for part of the season. You had Markstrom the whole year. You had Hanifin for most of it. You had Tanev for most of it. You had Zadorov for a bit of it. You had Lindholm for at least some of it. Now, he wasn't giving you a whole lot, but he was still there. And so you had all of those pieces. This blue line is not the blue line of a 500 hockey team. And while I do think that there is a scenario where Wolf and Vladar are just great and they maybe steal a few, I think you are asking a lot of this team to assume that they're going to get to 500. Maybe they don't just totally bottom out, but 82 points for this group? I do not see it. So I am going under on the Flames at 81.5. Chicago, 73.5. I have them over this year. I think that Connor Bedard showed last year he is special. Everything that we thought about him, he is. They went out. They're basically acquiring Taylor Hall again because he missed basically all of last season with that injury. They acquire Bertuzzi. They just bring in a few more actual NHL players to hang out on this roster. And so goaltending could still be a concern, but I think that they do take a step this year. Colorado at 102.5 points. This was one I went back and forth on a little bit. And if for no other reason than when I went over my Central after, a lot of overs. Lot of overs. Deeds, it's fine. Deeds, it's all good. We did the 10:30 stream yesterday, so it messes with you a little bit. So no worries. No need to worry. Happy you're here now. For Colorado, The downsides are pretty obvious. The Landeskog issues, goaltending we don't trust, and those sorts of things. But the upside is they have like one of the three best players in the world in Nathan McKinnon. They have one of the 5 or 6 best players in the world in Cale Makar. They have the best defensive pairing in the league with Makar and Taves, and they're just kind of awesome. So I do think that this will be a team that gets over 102.5 points this year. The Dallas Stars, their total is 102.5 as well. I have them also going over. So again, the Central has a lot of points. A couple teams that are going to get beat up on. We'll talk about them in a second. But I think that this is a Dallas Stars team that, yes, they're it could be another year of regression for some of the older guys. But now a full season with all of those young kids, the Johnstons, the Stankovens, all those guys, kind of pushing that forward, and Ottinger continuing to show progress and growth, or just staying great. I think either way makes this one of the best teams in the National Hockey League. And I think Heiskanen is criminally underrated. Losing Tanev is a bit of a blow from the playoff team from last year, and I don't think they really replaced him that well, but there's still enough talent on this team to get them pretty far. Edmonton, their total is at 108.5, by far the biggest point total in the NHL totals this season. I have to go under on that. I just... To assume a team gets to 110 points, basically, is just a lot. And I get, like, they figured it out last year. And I know some people have been a little bit questioning of the offseason, and it didn't end great with Holloway and Broberg on their way to St. Louis. But I still think adding Skinner, adding Arvidsson, those are some smart moves. And so I do think this is going to be a good hockey team. But 109 points is insane to assume. Anyway, like, teams are going to get to that point. But that's just, no, I cannot get them there. When you still have maybe some of the blue line issues you may have, when you have the goaltending inconsistency that this team has had, I just can't get them to that point. And, Stanley Cup hangover and all that stuff as well. So I go under on them. Although, I mean, the last team that lost in the Stanley Cup final went on to win it in the next year. And maybe Edmonton will. We'll talk about playoff stuff in a little bit. Up next, it's the LA Kings. I'm going under 96.5. I just think a lot of teams have kind of passed them by a little bit. Maybe they figured out the goaltending situation when they moved on from PLD and brought in Kemper in the offseason. But I still think something is missing, and maybe it is another step forward for Quinton Byfield. But I think that there just needs to be a little bit more scoring punch, and also this blue line, like Doughty was kind of starting to fall off anyway, and now he's just hurt. And I think that it's not as strong of a defense as maybe some people give them credit for. So I'm going under 96.5 on the Kings. Minnesota, I'm going over 94.5 for this group. Kirill the Thrill is back, and he is just absolutely just dealing. So yes, he is great. And this offense, like, there's a lot of pieces to like on this team. They got super banged up a year ago. And so I think that just health is going to help get them to this point, or to over 94.5 here this year. Nashville, their total is at 99.5. I can't, in all good conscience, or just for continuity, go off about how Tampa Bay lost Steven Stamkos and how that's going to hurt their season, and then say Nashville brought in Stamkos, and now that's not going to mean anything. No, I think it's going to mean something. I think that this team went very far, considering they had exactly one line that you were worried about with Forsberg, Nyquist, and then whoever. And now to go out and acquire Stamkos and Marchessault to basically just build a second line. They are a little soft down the middle, and that is a bit of a concern. But there is, with Forsberg and Nyquist and Stamkos and Marchessault, and still Roman freaking Yossi back there on the blue line, there is still, I think, a lot to be excited about with this team this year. And they are clearly going for it. So I think that this is really going to be a team that takes a step. San Jose, I have them under 64.5. I think this is going to be similar to the Chicago Bears, what we kind of predicted for them. Now, that hasn't necessarily turned out. But they're going to take steps forward, but maybe it's not going to show so much in the standings. It's going to be more an on ice thing. Like, okay, you feel better about this. They did go out and acquire some actual NHL players, which helps. But I still think that there is a severe lack of talent on this team that is going to, I think, hold them back quite a bit. Now, you only need them to get to 65 points to hit the over on this, but I still think it's going to be under on that group. Seattle. I don't necessarily love the long-term contracts they handed out, but I do think, again, Montour and Stevenson make them better this year. And those are two guys, like, proven commodities in the postseason and all of those things. And, like, Stevenson, I have long said, that's just a dude you win with. So I think that there is a lot to be excited about in Seattle, honestly. If Beniers can maybe have a bounce back from what happened a season ago, they have still quite a few very good players. It's just built out to be a bit of a deeper team. Goaltending, maybe, but defensively, excellent hockey team. And adding Stevenson, I think, does boost them over that 88.5. St. Louis Blues, I have them under 87.5. They are a team that feels like they are kind of stuck in the middle, and going out and getting Broberg and Holloway, I think, help quite a bit. But you look at the rest of that Central Division, and it is tough, man. Like, we just talked about how Nashville got better. Dallas is still really good. Colorado is still really good. Anticipating a better year for Minnesota based on health. They're going to be good. Utah, I think, takes a couple of steps forward this year. Winnipeg is still challenging, and the Chicago Blackhawks were expecting to take a step. I think that, kind of similar to Philadelphia over on the East, I think here in the West, St. Louis has a real challenge on their hands with just there being a lot of very good teams around them, and some of your kind of core pieces maybe starting to fade a little bit. And so I kind of think this is going to be a really, really long year out in St. Louis. So I have them under 87.5, and honestly, probably substantially. The Utah Jazz, I have them at over 88.5. Talked about it before. I think that this is a team that 100% takes a big step this year. I think they were ready to take one last year, and then all the uncertainty of last year really sent things spiraling. Then they go out and acquire Sergachev. They have a new home. They have so much talent that you can be excited about. I think that this is the year that the Utah team takes the step that a lot of people thought Arizona was going to a season ago. Vancouver, I have them under 99.5. The goaltending situation with Demko and injuries and all of that just scares me off of it a little bit. I still think they needed to do a little bit more on the blue line. Adding DeBrusk to this forward group is actually quite intriguing to me, and I think does make this a little bit fun for what this team can be offensively. But I think that defensively, they're just not quite there, even though I do love Quinn Hughes. But the goaltending situation, the health of Demko, and the long-term whatever of all of that, I just have some concerns. So I do have Vancouver slightly under 99.5. Vegas, I have them over 97.5. I think the way last season ended is leaving a bit of a sour taste in some people's mouths. And losing Marchessault and Stevenson is a hit, no question about it. They still have Eichel and Hannafin and Stone and Pietrangelo and Theodore. It goes on and on and on. Like, this is a really, really talented team. It is not a deep team. That obvious, not a deep team. But this is a group that has a lot of high-end skill. And so I just can't bet against them. I have them over 97.5. And Winnipeg, I have them over 96.5. Kind of wanted to not, but I just, again, a very talented roster. And with Scheifele, Perfetti, Ehlers, Connor, all those guys up front. Morrissey, I think, still doesn't get talked enough about his play on the blue line. And Connor Hellebuyck between the pipes when he is on, one of the best goalies in the league. Again, it ended very poorly out in Winnipeg last year, but I think there's, for regular season purposes anyway, I think this team's going to be all right. Hockey playoffs now. This is what I have for my predictions. So, in the East, I have in the Atlantic, I have Florida finishing first. I have them playing the wild card team of Boston in the first round. My Atlantic 2-3 is Toronto against Detroit. I think Detroit is ahead of Boston, and they get into this 2-3 matchup. I have the number one team in the Metro as the New Jersey Devils. I have them playing the wildcard team of Montreal. This is basically just me being take committed at this point and just like, no, I've been saying all year that they're going to take a step. I don't care that half of their roster got injured in like 2 preseason games. I have to stick with it. So I think that Montreal does get there. And then the 2-3 in the Metro is the Rangers and the Carolina Hurricanes. Coming out of that, it would be Florida with the win over Boston. I think honestly, probably pretty handily. I think Toronto does beat Detroit in the first round of the playoffs, and then the Devils and Rangers win. So it'll be Florida against Toronto, the Devils against the Rangers. This is where Toronto's, and they lose to Florida. I have them against the Rangers in the Eastern Conference Final, and I have the New York Rangers on their way to the Stanley Cup. Out west, my number one team in the Central, the Dallas Stars. I have them facing Seattle as a wildcard team. The 2-3 matchup in the Central is Nashville against Colorado. In the Pacific, I have Vegas, as the number one team. I have them facing the wildcard team of Minnesota, and the 2-3 being Edmonton against Vancouver. So we get a rematch of that playoff series. And we get the same result. I have Edmonton beating Vancouver again. They would face Vegas in the next round, and Dallas takes on Nashville. In the Western Conference Final, I have Nashville facing the Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas moves on to the Stanley Cup Final, where they would face the New York Rangers and eventually lose to the New York Rangers. I have the Blue Shirts, the team from Broadway, as the Stanley Cup champions this year, as the trophy gets hoisted in Madison Square Garden for the first time in, by that point, 31 years. So that is those are my official predictions for the NHL season here in 2024-2025.